Welcome, welcome. You're here at Super Harry. Today we present to you, What If Madame Pomfrey Hospital Scan Revealed 28 Blood Theft Rituals and Harry Lord of Death Magic. Like and subscribe if you want more awesome stories. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Chapter 1, The Scan. The examine room smelled like dittany and something sharper underneath, antiseptic, maybe, or the particular sterile tang of magic that had been used too many times in too small a space. Harry sat on the edge of the examination table with his shirt half-tucked, watching Madame Pomfrey move around him with the focused efficiency of someone who had been doing this for 40 years and had stopped finding it interesting about 39 years ago. It was a routine scan. She'd said so twice. Before term diagnostics, she'd explained when she'd pulled him aside in the entrance hall, still dusty from the Hogwarts Express, while the rest of the students filed past toward the Great Hall. New policy, Mr. Potter. All students returning from extended periods away from supervised magical environments. Quite standard. She'd said it with the clipped certainty of someone who considered all conversation a mild inconvenience to efficiency. Harry hadn't argued. He was too tired to argue. The summer had been the kind of long that felt less like a season and more like a punishment, and the moment he'd stepped onto platform 9 3/4 that morning, he'd felt something in his chest loosen slightly, the particular relief of returning to the only place that had ever felt like ground under his feet. He'd let Hermione and Ron go on ahead. Just a quick scan, Madame Pomfrey had said. 5 minutes. That had been 20 minutes ago. She was on her third pass now. The diagnostic spell she was using, a slow, amber gold sweep that moved from his head down to his feet and back again, had turned a color on the second pass that Harry didn't have a name for. Not gold anymore. Not amber. Something older, like light through very old glass, like the color of something burning a long way off. Hold still, she said, and her voice had changed. Just slightly. The clipped efficiency had acquired an edge. Harry held still. He watched her face because he'd learned a long time ago that watching faces told you more than listening to words. Pomfrey's face was professionally arranged, the practiced neutrality of a medical professional, but there was something happening behind her eyes that she wasn't bothering to hide because she didn't think he was watching carefully enough to see it. She was scared. Not dramatically. Not trembling lip, wide eyes scared. The particular scared of someone who has found something in a routine check that has no business being routine. The scared of a doctor who opens a file expecting paperwork and finds a bomb. The diagnostic spell finished its third pass and died. The amber light winked out. Pomfrey stood very still for a moment. Then she set her wand down on the counter with the deliberate care of someone making sure their hands don't shake, and she walked to the door of the examination room. Wait here please, Mr. Potter, she said, without turning around. The door closed behind her. Harry sat on the examination table. The paper crinkled under him when he shifted. He could hear the muffled sounds of the castle beyond, the distant thunder of hundreds of students making their way to the feast, the overlap of voices and laughter, someone's trunk scraping stone floors somewhere far above. He thought about getting up and leaving. He thought about it seriously, actually waited, the feast, Ron saving him a seat, Hermione already organizing her new textbooks by subject in her bag, and then he didn't move, because the look on Pomfrey's face had settled into his chest like a stone and he couldn't quite shake it loose. She'd been scared. He waited. The voices came through the examination room's far wall before the door opened. The wall was thick, old Hogwarts stone, the kind that had been absorbing secrets for 1,000 years, but Harry had spent 5 years in this castle learning which walls carried sound and which didn't, and this one, he already knew, was not as solid as it looked. There was a gap where the old stone had shifted, a hairline fault that ran from floor to halfway up the wall, and sound came through it like water through a crack. He heard Pomfrey first. Completely beyond anything I've ever seen in 40 years. The markers are unmistakable, Minerva, I've run it 3 times, and then McGonagall, sharp and urgent, what kind of markers? Blood theft. Ritual extraction. A pause, and the word that came out of Pomfrey's mouth next was not the tone of a medical professional. It was the tone of someone reading a verdict. 28 separate incidents. The silence on the other side of the wall was the loudest thing Harry had ever heard. He sat very still. The paper crinkled once and then he controlled himself, and after that he was absolutely motionless on the examination table, hands flat on his thighs, and he listened. 28, McGonagall said. Not a question. The repetition of something that doesn't fit in your mouth. Some are old. Infancy, early childhood. The magical signature on those is degraded, but they're there. Someone knew exactly what they were doing. The extraction sites are precise, not accidental. But there are others. Another pause. Some are recent, Minerva. Within the last 2 years. Recent. McGonagall's voice had gone very quiet. That was worse, somehow, than if she'd shouted. During the school year. I can't tell precisely. The dating on ritual markers isn't exact. But, yes. Some of them. Possibly. Pomfrey's voice dropped further, and Harry had to lean slightly without moving anything but his inner ear. The damage to the boy's magical core is structural. He's been losing power, not dramatically, you understand, not in a way that would be immediately obvious, but consistently, like a slow bleed. For years. Whatever these rituals were feeding, they needed a steady supply, and they took it. The crack in the wall did something then that Harry was grateful for. It carried the sound of footsteps, a third set, heavier and more deliberate than the other two, the sound of someone who moved through spaces as though the spaces were glad to have him. Dumbledore. His voice, when it came, was warm and measured and absolutely controlled. Poppy. Minerva. What has the skin found? Pomfrey told him. Harry listened to the telling. He listened to the way she laid it out, the 3 passes of the diagnostic, the color change, the 28 markers, the structural damage, the recent extractions, and he listened to Dumbledore's silence while she spoke, and that silence told him everything. Because it wasn't the silence of shock. It was the silence of calculation. It lasted exactly long enough to be the silence of someone not being surprised, and then Dumbledore said, I see, in a voice that managed to sound weary and compassionate and entirely in control, and Harry felt something happen in his chest that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite either of them. It was something colder. Cleaner. He'd heard that tone before, that particular management of a difficult situation, that voice that turned catastrophes into chess moves, and he recognized it the way you recognize the smell of a place you've been before, not because you're thinking about it, but because your body already knows. He got off the examination table. He straightened his shirt. He picked up his wand from where he'd set it beside him and he slid it into his pocket. Then he opened the examination room door and walked out. The 3 of them were standing in Pomfrey's office, she at her desk, McGonagall by the window, Dumbledore near the fireplace with his hands folded and his half-moon glasses catching the light. They all turned when the door opened. Pomfrey's expression moved through alarm to something complicated. McGonagall's went carefully blank, which from her was almost an expression of anguish. Dumbledore's, and Harry watched it, really watched it, did something subtle and quick that resolved into the warm, sad, twinkling look that Harry had trusted for 4 years. He didn't trust it now. Harry, Dumbledore said gently. I think perhaps you should sit down. I heard, Harry said. A beat. Yes. I rather thought you might have. 28, Harry said. Not a question. Just the number, put into the room like a stone into still water. Pomfrey looked at Dumbledore. McGonagall looked at the floor for exactly 1 second, which was the most emotion she would allow herself, and then looked back at Harry. Mr. Potter, she said, come and sit down. I'm fine standing. He wasn't being dramatic. He actually felt fine standing, steadier on his feet than he'd felt in months, which was strange, which he filed away to think about later. What are blood theft rituals? It was Pomfrey who answered, because of the three of them she was the only one who seemed to think he deserved a straight answer. They're exactly what they sound like. A ritual practitioner extracts blood from a subject, usually without their knowledge or consent, usually in small enough quantities to go unnoticed, and uses it to power a spell, a ward, a binding, or some other piece of complex magic. The blood acts as a fuel source. The more magically potent the subject, the more powerful the ritual. And 28 of those have been done to me. The markers indicate. She stopped. Started again. Yes. Harry looked at Dumbledore. Dumbledore looked back at him with that warm, sad expression, and for the first time Harry looked at it not as the face of a mentor but as a performance, and he wondered how long he'd been watching the performance without seeing the performer. Who did them? Harry asked. We don't know yet, Dumbledore said. But you have guesses. Harry, you have guesses, Harry said again, evenly, and this time Dumbledore stopped, because Harry's voice wasn't the voice he usually used with Dumbledore. The usual voice, even when Harry was angry, even when he was furious, always carried somewhere underneath it the note of a boy trying to make an adult understand him. This voice didn't have that note. This voice was just a question, flat and genuine and waiting for an answer. Dumbledore studied him for a moment. Something moved behind the blue eyes, behind the half-moon glasses, behind the long beard and the careful warmth, something assessing, recalibrating. Some of the signatures, Dumbledore said carefully, are consistent with dark magic associated with Voldemort and his followers. Some of them, Harry said. Not all. The pause was a fraction of a second too long. We will investigate thoroughly, Dumbledore said. Harry nodded. It was the nod of someone who has gotten the answer they already expected. He turned to Pomfrey. The structural damage you mentioned. To my magical core. What does that mean practically? Pomfrey blinked. She was still adjusting to the version of Harry Potter currently standing in her office, which was not the version she'd been expecting, and then answered because she was a healer first and everything else second. Your core has been compensating. Magical cores are resilient, they route around damage the way water routes around blockage. But years of steady extraction mean the rerouting has become the pattern. You've likely been operating at somewhere between 60 and 75% of your actual capacity. Harry let that land. Let it settle. 60%. Maybe 65. For years. While he'd been struggling through defense lessons, through dueling, through everything, he'd been fighting with someone's hands on the throttle. Can it be repaired? He asked. With the extraction stopped. Yes, over time. The core will recalibrate. She hesitated. But Mr. Potter, the scan showed something else. Something I'm not entirely sure how to categorize it. Tell me. She glanced at Dumbledore. Just once. Harry looked at Dumbledore too. I'd like her to tell me. The room held that for a moment. Then Dumbledore inclined his head. Pomfrey folded her hands on her desk and said, alongside the damage markers, there is a second type of magical signature in your core. It's very old, older than anything I've seen, and it isn't damage. It isn't residue. It's more like, she searched for the word. An impression. As if something very large passed through your magical core and left its shape behind. Passed through, Harry repeated. The closest analogy I can give you is the way a river changes its bed. The water moves on, but the stone is carved. Whatever passed through you, and my best guess, given what you described of the night Voldemort's curse rebounded, is that the passage happened then, it was immensely powerful. And it left a mark. She paused again. No. Not a mark. More like, a claim. The word dropped into the room and nobody said anything. Harry stood in the silence and felt it, that steadiness in his legs, that clarity in his chest, the feeling he'd been having since he'd gotten off the table that was difficult to name, like the feeling of finally breathing correctly after years of shallow breaths. All right, he said. All right? McGonagall's voice had an incredulous edge. I mean, I understand. He picked up his bag from where he'd left it by the door. Pomfrey, the scan results. Can I have a copy? She blinked. Well, technically the medical records are, my medical records, Harry said. Another beat. She pulled a spare piece of parchment from her desk and copied the results with a quick transcription charm, and folded it, and held it out to him. He took it. He put it in his bag. Thank you, he said. He nodded to McGonagall, who was looking at him with an expression that was half devastated and half something he couldn't quite name, something that looked almost like recognition. He turned to go. Harry. Dumbledore's voice, soft, warm, weighted with everything it always carried. Harry turned. I want you to know, Dumbledore said, that everything I have done has been in service of protecting you. Harry looked at him. Really looked at him, at the blue eyes and the long beard and the half-moon glasses, at the great and ancient weight of the man, at the genuine love that lived in his face alongside everything else. Because it was genuine. That was the thing that made it complicated. That was the thing that made it impossible to dismiss with simple anger. Dumbledore loved him. Harry believed that completely. He also believed, standing there with the folded parchment in his bag and the sound of 28 still echoing in his chest, that love and harm were not opposites. I know, Harry said. And he left. The corridor outside the hospital wing was empty, everyone was at the feast, the sounds of it filtering from far below, laughter and the clink of plates and the particular warm noise of several hundred people enjoying themselves. Harry walked in the other direction, up, following the staircases with the muscle memory of 5 years until he was at the 7th floor, until he was standing in front of the tapestry of Barnabas the Barmy. He walked past it 3 times, thinking, I need a place to think. The door appeared. Inside, the room of requirement had given him, not the cozy den it sometimes produced, not the training space it had occasionally offered, but something stripped and clean. A single chair. A table. Good light. The fire in the grate was blue, which it had never been before. Harry sat down. He took the parchment out of his bag and unfolded it. Pomfrey's handwriting, precise and medical, listed out the results of the diagnostic. He read through the ritual markers, 28 lines, each with a date range and a magical signature classification. His eyes moved down the list and stopped at 2 separate points. The first stop, 12 of the markers bore the same classification code. A code Pomfrey had annotated in the margin, dark/Voldemort adjacent signature. The second stop, 3 of the markers bore a different code. Pomfrey had not annotated this one. She either didn't know what it meant or she did know and had decided not to write it down, and Harry didn't know which possibility was worse. He put the parchment on the table. The fire was blue. He watched it. He thought about the word claim and the way Pomfrey had said it, not like a problem, not quite like a diagnosis, but like a fact of geography. The way you'd say a river has carved itself a bed. Something had passed through him and left its shape behind. On the night Voldemort's curse had rebounded. Harry had read about the mechanics of that night in fragments, in Dumbledore's explanations, in dark magic theory chapters, in conversations with nearly headless Nick about the nature of death-adjacent magic. The story was always the same, the curse had rebounded because of the protective enchantment his mother's sacrifice had created, because love was the countervailing force, because Lily Potter's death had wrapped Harry in something that dark magic could not penetrate. That was the story. He thought about the claim. He thought about the impression in his magical core, the shape something left when it passes through. He thought about what was present on the night the curse rebounded. His mother's sacrifice. Voldemort's dark magic. And the moment between the curse striking and Voldemort losing his physical form, the moment of Harry's near death. What passes through a near-dead child? Harry sat with that question. The blue fire crackled. Outside, far below, the feast was going on without him. He thought about the 28 rituals. He thought about 60% capacity, maybe 65. He thought about the years he'd spent struggling, in defense, in dueling, in every magical confrontation, feeling somehow just barely short of what he needed, always a half step behind his own potential, as if there was a ceiling just above his reach. Someone had installed that ceiling. Multiple someones. 28 times. And one of the ritual signatures on the parchment, one of the 3 unclassified ones, carried a date range Pomfrey had specified with unusual precision. Approximately, summer before second year, late July. Harry had been at Privet Drive in late July before second year. He'd barely seen anyone magical. Except, he pulled the memory up slowly, carefully, the way you pull a splinter, Dobby. Dumbledore's visit to warn the Dursleys, which had been around then, he stopped. He'd been 11 in late July before second year. He'd been 12. And Dumbledore had visited. He didn't make a decision right then. He was very careful not to make decisions in the first 5 minutes of realizing something terrible. That was new, that carefulness. It had arrived somewhere in the last hour, along with the steadiness in his legs and the clarity in his chest, and he didn't quite know where it had come from, but he was glad of it. He folded the parchment again. Put it back in his bag. He needed Hermione. Not because he couldn't think through this alone, but because Hermione approached problems the way a force of nature approaches an obstacle, relentlessly, without sentimentality, and with a comprehensive knowledge base that made her almost supernaturally useful when the problem was the kind that required knowing things. He also needed Ron, because Ron was the kind of person who, when presented with a situation that was too enormous to look at directly, could somehow make it manageable by saying the exact right stupid thing at exactly the right moment. Harry had never told Ron how valuable that was. He made a note to tell him at some point. He left the room of requirement and took the stairs. The feast was in full swing when he slipped into the great hall. The sorting had already finished, he'd missed it entirely, and the new first-years were sitting in nervous clusters along their respective tables. The enchanted ceiling was showing a sky thick with stars. Dumbledore's chair at the high table was occupied, but Harry didn't look at it. He slid in beside Ron and Hermione at the Gryffindor table. "There you are," Ron said around a mouthful of roast potato. "What did Pomfrey want?" "You were gone ages." "Routine scan," Harry said. He reached for the pumpkin juice. His voice was easy, normal, exactly what it needed to be. He could feel Hermione's eyes on him. She had the particular awareness of someone who made a study of human beings and had made a special study of him, and she was reading the gap between his voice and his face. He looked at her. She looked at him. He gave the smallest nod, later. She nodded back. Her jaw set. Ron had moved on to talking about the new Gryffindor Quidditch lineup, and Harry listened, and ate, and watched the candlelit faces of hundreds of students who had no idea that in a room 4 floors above them, 3 adults were discussing what had been done to the boy currently eating his roast chicken without any visible sign of falling apart. He was not falling apart. He noticed this with a kind of detached curiosity, the way you might notice that a piece of furniture is heavier than it looks. He'd expected, he didn't know. Some version of devastation. Some version of the desperate, hot-eyed, blind anger that had gotten him through most of his 4th year. This wasn't that. This was something quieter. Something that had settled into his bones and made them feel, oddly, more solid. Like ballast. Like weight added to a structure that had been swaying. 28 rituals. Years of a stolen ceiling. And underneath all of it, in the deepest part of his magical core, the shape of something enormous that had passed through him and left itself behind. He thought about the word claim again. He thought about what exactly had been claimed, and whether it was his. And he ate his dinner, and listened to Ron talk about Quidditch, and watched Dumbledore at the high table with the new bright clear eyes of someone who has stopped being managed and started paying attention, and he made no decisions, and he was not afraid. Neville Longbottom, seated 3 people down the table, glanced at Harry twice during the meal. Harry caught his eye the second time, and Neville didn't look away immediately the way he once would have. He looked steadily back. There was something in his face, recognition, maybe. Or solidarity. Or the expression of someone who had been watching something happen for years and was waiting to see if anyone else had finally noticed. Harry nodded at him. Neville nodded back. Luna, at the Ravenclaw table, was reading a copy of the Quibbler upside down and eating without looking at her plate. She looked up once across the great hall, directly at Harry, from a distance of 40 feet, with no apparent reason to look up at that moment and no searching for him first. She just looked up and her eyes went straight to his face. She smiled at him. It was a small, specific smile. Not cheerful the way Luna's smiles usually were, broad and unself-conscious and slightly alien. This smile was knowing. This smile was the smile of someone who has been expecting something and has just seen it arrive. Harry did not know why that smile made the hair on the back of his neck rise. He found out later. Hermione knocked on the dormitory door at 10:20, which was technically against rules in a way she would normally have observed scrupulously, but she did it anyway, and when Harry opened the door she was holding 3 books and a notebook and looked like she had been waiting to have a particular conversation since approximately 5 minutes into the feast. Ron was already there, sitting on Harry's bed. Harry had told him during the walk up from the Great Hall, told him plainly, economically, the facts in order without dramatics, the way you tell a friend something serious when you're past the point of cushioning it. Ron had gone very white and very quiet, which for Ron Weasley was the equivalent of anyone else screaming. Right, Hermione said, closing the door and sitting cross-legged on the floor with the books in her lap. Tell me everything, Pomfrey said. Exactly. Harry told her. She didn't interrupt. When he finished she was quiet for a moment and then she opened the top book, Ritual Magic, Theory, Practice, and Prohibition, to a section she had already tabbed with a bookmark, which meant she had gone back to her room between dinner and now specifically to find this book, which meant she had started working on the problem the moment he'd nodded at her across the table. He felt a sudden fierce rush of something toward her that was entirely too large to express, so he didn't. Blood theft rituals, she said, reading quickly, are a Class 1 prohibited practice under the 1692 Magical Cooperation Act. They require, listen to this, they require either proximity or a pre-existing blood bond connection. The practitioner can't steal blood from a distance. They need to be within about 20 feet of the subject, and they need either direct physical contact or an established sympathetic connection. She looked up. Harry. For 28 of these to have been performed on you, someone, multiple someones, maybe, have been physically near you, repeatedly, over the course of your entire life. I know, Harry said. The ones Voldemort could have done are, well, graveyard. She didn't need to elaborate. Maybe the night at Godric's Hollow if the ritual could be cast under extreme conditions. But 12 of the markers were Voldemort-adjacent signatures, Harry said. There were 3 others with a different signature. Different how? He told her about the date range on the 3rd unclassified marker. He told her about Dumbledore's visit before 2nd year. He told her what he'd heard through the crack in the wall, not all of it, but the relevant parts, and specifically the silence that followed the revelation, and what that silence sounded like. The room was very quiet. Okay, Ron said. His voice was the careful voice of someone choosing words very deliberately. So some of these were done by Voldemort's people. Yes, Harry said. And some of them, possibly, were done by. Ron stopped. Possibly, Harry said. He wasn't committing to it yet. He wanted evidence, not intuition. But the possibility sat in the room with them, large and unavoidable. Hermione had closed the book. Her hands were folded on top of it and she was staring at the middle distance with the expression she wore when she was running through implications at a speed that exceeded normal thought. The second signature, she said finally. The one Pomfrey didn't annotate. She has to know what it is. She's been a healer for 40 years, she's seen everything. If she didn't write it down, she made a choice not to, Harry said. Which means it's recognizable, Hermione said, and she didn't want it on paper. Ron swore quietly. Harry had never been more grateful for Ron's complete absence of filter. "The claim," Hermione said next. "What Pomfrey called the impression in your core. The shape something left." She uncurled from the floor and went to her bag and pulled out a second book, older, spine-cracked, the kind of old that meant it had been reprinted many times over many centuries. She put it on the bed and opened it to a page, and Harry leaned forward to look. The page header read, "Death Magic, Sovereign Traditions and Historical Lineages." "I found this in the third-year supplementary reading list," Hermione said. "It was optional." "I read it." Of course she had. "There's a tradition, ancient, predating the modern ministry by several centuries, called death sovereignty. The principle is this: magic has different categories of authority. Combat magic, transformation magic, healing magic, each has theoretical limits, practitioners at the top of each field who could be called masters. Death magic is different because death isn't a type of magic. It's a threshold. And the tradition holds that the threshold can have a sovereign, someone through whom death itself has passed, actively, and who survived that passage. That's rare, Harry said. It's theoretically impossible according to modern magical theory, Hermione said. Except you're sitting right there. Ron looked between them. So what does it mean? Being death's sovereign, or whatever. According to this, Hermione said, it means, among other things, that death itself cannot be used against you by another practitioner. It means that souls who have passed through the threshold owe you, not servitude, not obedience, but recognition. She searched for the right word. Like a passport. Like you have citizenship in a country that everyone else can only visit. And it means, Harry said quietly, reading over her shoulder, his eyes running down the page, that things which were bound using death, or the threat of death, or stolen life, can be unbound, Hermione said. By you. If the tradition is real and if you're actually what Pomfrey's scan suggests. They sat with that. The candles in the dormitory burned low. Outside the window, Hogwarts was settling into its nighttime sounds, the creak of old stone, the distant movement of the lake, the occasional flicker of something that was just wind. I need to know more, Harry said. About the rituals. About who did them. About what they were feeding. I'll start in the library tomorrow, Hermione said. Before class. I'll need access to the restricted section. I can get a pass for advanced magical theory research. I'll help, Ron said, with the decisive tone of someone who has not fully understood the research task but has fully committed to participating in it. Harry picked up the old book from his bed and read the death sovereignty section again. He read it slowly, not the way he usually read, skimming for plot, for relevant information, but word by word, the way you read something you've been handed that was written specifically for you. At the bottom of the section, a single italicized line, the sovereign knows their domain not by learning it, but by recognizing it. What was already theirs announces itself. He put the book down. Hermione was watching him. How do you feel? She asked. It was a genuine question, not a social formality. She wanted the actual answer, because she was Hermione and she processed emotion through understanding it, and she needed to understand where he was. Harry thought about how to answer it honestly. Like I've been in a room my whole life, he said slowly, with a window that was painted over. And someone just scraped a bit of the paint off. He paused. And I don't know yet what's outside. But I can feel the light. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded, and there was something in her expression that was relief, and something that was grief, and something that was the complicated emotion of a person who loves their friend very much and has just understood the shape of what has been done to them. We'll figure it out, she said. I know, Harry said. He meant it. He lay in the dark after Hermione had gone and Ron had fallen asleep, and he listened to the castle, and somewhere between the sound of the lake and the creak of stone, he heard something that shouldn't have been there, a whisper, low and directionless, the kind of sound that existed at the very edge of perception. Not words, exactly. More like more actions request aborted, write the next chapter now. Chapter 2, The Weight of 28. The whisper didn't have words. That was the first thing Harry noticed about it. It wasn't language, exactly, but it carried meaning the way music carries emotion, the feeling arriving before the understanding. He lay in the dark and listened to it the way you listen to a sound you've heard before but can't place, turning it over, trying to find its edges. It stopped when the castle clock struck midnight. Clean, like a candle being pinched out. Harry stared at the canopy of his bed and thought, I'm not imagining things. He'd been told he was imagining things before. He had a fairly comprehensive internal catalogue of the times adults had looked at him with that particular combination of concern and dismissal, the look that said you've been through a lot, of course you're seeing things, and he knew now, with the same cold clarity that had settled into him yesterday evening, that he was not going to accept that interpretation of his own experience anymore. He'd heard something. He'd felt it, more accurately. And it had felt familiar. He fell asleep eventually, and if he dreamed he didn't remember it. In the morning the whisper was gone and Hogwarts was the loud, rushing, chaotic creature it always was at the start of term, corridors jammed with students comparing timetables, the smell of breakfast and morning air, everyone slightly too energized and slightly too loud in the way of people who have been missing each other for months. Harry moved through it with his eyes open in a way they hadn't been in years. He noticed things. He noticed that nearly headless Nick, passing in the corridor outside the Great Hall, turned to look at Harry when Harry walked by, not the cheerful greeting Nick usually offered, but something else. A pause. A specific quality of attention, almost deferential, that Nick recovered from quickly and covered with his usual pleasantries. But it had been there. He noticed that the fat friar, glimpsed through a doorway on the third floor, went very still when Harry passed. The way things go still when something important moves through a space. He noticed that the Bloody Baron, who normally regarded living students with the kind of weary contempt royalty reserves for minor inconveniences, watched Harry from the end of the Slytherin table as Harry crossed the Great Hall, watched him with an expression that had no contempt in it at all. The Bloody Baron's expression was, Harry filed this away carefully, respect. He mentioned none of this to anyone. He ate breakfast. He had potions first period and he went to it with his bag on his shoulder and his mind running two parallel tracks, Snape's class in the foreground, and underneath it, steady and continuous, the turning over of everything he'd learned in the last 16 hours. Hermione was in the library before breakfast. She emerged at 8:05 with ink on two of her fingers and the bright-eyed focused look of someone who has found the thread of something and is pulling it. I found the classification system Pomfrey used, she said in a low voice, falling into step beside him on the way to the dungeons. The codes on the ritual markers. I cross-referenced them with the Ministry's restricted registry of dark magical signatures. And the first 12, the Voldemort-adjacent ones, are consistent with something called a sanguine tether. It's a ritual dark wizards use to establish a remote connection with a specific magical source. Like a tap. You perform the ritual, you extract a small amount of blood, you use it to anchor the tether, and from that point forward you can draw from that person's magical core at intervals without repeating the physical extraction. So he only needed to do it once to keep drawing forever. No, that's the thing. The tether degrades over time. Particularly if the subject is growing, a child's magical core is constantly changing, so the tether would need to be refreshed, which is why there are multiple markers. It needed maintenance. She paused, lowering her voice further as they joined the stream of students heading to the dungeons. But here's what's important, a sanguine tether feeds whatever ritual it's anchoring. Voldemort's Horcruxes, probably. Every extraction fed the stabilization of the soul fragments. Harry processed that. So every time someone performed a blood ritual on me, it made the Horcruxes more stable, yes. It wasn't just theft. It was targeted maintenance. On objects designed to keep Voldemort's soul anchored to the living world. She looked at him, and there was something fierce and furious in her expression that she was keeping very tightly controlled. Someone has been maintaining Voldemort's Horcruxes using your blood. The dungeon steps were cold under his feet. Harry walked them without feeling the cold. The unclassified markers, he said. The 3 with the second signature. Hermione's jaw worked. I haven't found the classification yet. I need access to deeper archive records, and Madame Pants won't give me unrestricted access on the first morning of term without a faculty approval form. Get one. I'm going to ask Professor McGonagall during lunch. Harry nearly said she might not help and stopped himself, because that was the old thinking, the thinking that the adults around him were fundamentally on his side and would help if he just asked properly. He didn't know that anymore, not about all of them. But McGonagall had stood in that room yesterday and looked at the floor for exactly 1 second, and that second had told him something. She'll help, he said instead, and believed it. Potions was Snape in full first day of term form, which meant a particular brand of contemptuous theater that Harry had long since learned to rout around. He sat and brewed and kept his hands steady and his mind on the 2 parallel tracks, and at one point Snape stopped behind him and looked at his cauldron and said nothing, which from Snape was almost a compliment. Harry noticed that Snape, too, glanced at him during class with a quality of attention that was different from the usual hostility. Not warmer. Not softer. But, assessing. Recalibrating. Like a man who has read one thing on a map and found the terrain somewhat different from what was described. Harry didn't return the look. The unspeakable arrived at noon. Harry was in the corridor outside the library when he saw her, a woman of about 45, in robes that were a very specific shade of grey that managed to be both unremarkable and precisely correct, with the kind of face that was designed to be forgotten. Not ugly, not striking, just perfectly, professionally neutral. She walked with the purpose of someone who knew exactly where they were going and had no interest in anything else, and she was heading toward Dumbledore's office. Harry didn't know what she was. He found out from Hermione, who'd been coming out of the library at the same moment and had watched the woman pass with narrowed eyes. Department of Mysteries, Hermione said quietly, watching the woman's back disappear around a corner. Those robes, the cut is standard Dom issue. My father worked near the ministry for a while when I was small, and there were unspeakables in the building occasionally. That's what they wear. She came fast, Harry said. She came very fast, Hermione agreed. They looked at each other. Whatever Pomfrey's scan triggered, there's a protocol. Probably any diagnostic result that shows death magic markers gets flagged automatically, and the flag goes to the Department of Mysteries. Or someone at the Department of Mysteries was already watching for it, Harry said. Hermione was quiet for a moment. Then, yes. Or that. Her name, Harry found out by afternoon, was Aldrich Vane. He found this out because she came to his afternoon defense against the dark arts class, a substitute lesson with a temporary professor while the position remained unfilled for the first weeks, and she was sitting in the back of the classroom when they arrived, with a clipboard and the expression of someone performing a routine observation. She wasn't performing a routine observation. Harry felt her watching him from the moment he sat down. Felt it the way you feel the sun on the back of your neck, present, directional, specific. He worked through the lesson notes without acknowledging her. Hermione, beside him, had clocked the clipboard and was slowly and subtly turning the pages of her textbook without reading a word of it. At the end of class, when the other students were filing out, Vane stood up and said, "Mr. Potter. A moment, if you would." Harry stayed seated. He looked up at her with the open, patient expression of someone with absolutely nothing to hide and nothing to prove. Sure. She came down the aisle between the desks and stopped at the end of his row. Up close she was more precisely unremarkable than she'd seen from a distance, every feature calibrated toward forgettability, which in itself was remarkable. She had very clear gray eyes and she looked at him the way he imagined she looked at everything, like a problem being sorted into categories. "My name is Vane," she said. "I'm here in connection with the diagnostic scan performed yesterday by Madame Pomfrey. I have a few questions." "Hermione," Harry said pleasantly, "would you mind waiting in the corridor?" "Actually," Vane said, "it might be better, she stays," Harry said. It was not said with any edge. It wasn't said loudly or with the weight of a challenge. It was said the way you state a preference about how you'd like your tea, mild, final, requiring no further discussion. Vane assessed him for a half-second and then nodded, and pulled out a chair and sat down across the row from him, and Hermione settled back into her seat with her hands folded and her expression of a person preparing to listen and remember everything. "The scan results," Vane said. "You've seen them." "They're my medical records," Harry said. "Of course. I want to make sure you understand what you're looking at. Blood theft ritual markers can sometimes be misread by standard diagnostic spells. There's a class of naturally occurring magical residue that can present as 28 of them," Harry said. She paused. A small pause, but Hermione caught it. Harry saw Hermione's pen move slightly on her parchment. "The volume is unusual," Vane said. "But misclassification isn't impossible. Is that what you were sent to tell me?" Harry said. He was still pleasant. His voice was still the easy, patient tone of someone having an ordinary conversation. "That it might have been misclassified?" Vane looked at him for a moment. Her grey eyes did something that wasn't quite a recalibration, more like the resolution of a hypothesis. "I was sent to ensure the information is properly contextualized," she said. "By who?" She smiled. It was a professional smile, empty of warmth and completely inoffensive. "By the Department of Mysteries." "On whose authority within the department?" Another pause. Slightly longer. "That's not information I'm at liberty to share." "All right." Harry stood up, picking up his bag. "I'll write to the ministry directly. I'm sure they can tell me who authorized you to contextualize my medical records." "Mr. Potter, I'm not angry," Harry said, and meant it. He looked down at her and there was nothing in his expression but the plain truth. He wasn't angry, he wasn't afraid, and he wasn't going to be managed. "I understand you're doing a job. But whatever you were sent here to explain away, I'm not interested in the explanation. I'm interested in the facts. And the facts are going to come out regardless, so," he shrugged. "You can tell whoever sent you that I said so." He walked to the door. Hermione followed, and she was very good at keeping her face neutral, but Harry, who knew her face the way he knew his own hands, could see the satisfaction in it. "There is," Vane said behind them, "a second matter." Harry stopped without turning. "The secondary signature in your scan," Vane said. "The impression in your core. That signature is known to the department. It has been documented twice before in the historical record." She paused. "The last time it appeared, the person carrying it," another pause, careful and deliberate. "They became something the department has no modern framework for. We would like to understand what you're becoming, Mr. Potter. That's the honest version. We'd like to understand it before it develops further." Harry turned then. He looked at her, at the grey eyes and the forgettable face and the clipboard, and he said, "So would I." He meant that too. The corridor outside was warm and full of afternoon light, and Hermione grabbed his arm the moment the classroom door closed behind them and pulled him sideways into an alcove. "She's not here to help," she said, rapid and low. "I know. She's here to assess the situation and report back. And whatever she reports back is going to determine how the department responds to you." Which means, Hermione was thinking faster than she was speaking, which was an unusual condition for her. "Which means we need to get ahead of this. We need to understand what you're becoming before they do. We need to know what that signature actually is and what the death sovereignty tradition actually involves, and we need to know it before the department decides they know better." "I need the restricted section," Harry said. "I know. I got the form from McGonagall at lunch." She produced a signed permission slip from her bag. She signed it without asking what it was for. She just signed it and looked at me and said, "Be thorough." Hermione's voice was careful. "I think she's on our side." "I think so too," Harry said. They went to the library at 6, after dinner, when the evening rush had thinned. Neville was in the library already, working on an essay for herbology, which was very on brand for Neville, and he looked up when they came in and his eyes went to Harry with that same expression from the feast, that same steady recognition, and he closed his herbology book. "I'll help," he said. Harry looked at him. "I don't know with what exactly," Neville said, with the blunt practicality of someone who has moved past hesitation, "but I've been watching you deal with things alone for 4 years and I'd like to not do that anymore. If that's all right." "That's fine," Harry said, and something shifted between them, a permanent shift, the kind that doesn't need ceremony. The three of them spread across the restricted section table with Madame Pants watching from a suspicious distance. Hermione went straight to the archival ritual records, an enormous, cross-referenced system of bound volumes that catalogued every known magical practice and its ministry classification status. Ron, who had come along for reasons he described as backup, and which mostly manifested as fetching books from higher shelves and occasionally making useful observations about the indexing system, proved surprisingly helpful at navigating the cross-reference system by spine color. "Here," Hermione said, 40 minutes in. She had a volume the size of a flagstone open on the table, her finger marking a page. "Blood Sovereignty Rituals, Subcategory, Proxy Fueling. Cross-reference with Death Anchor Practices." Harry leaned over. The text was old, not handwritten, but typeset in an archaic font, the kind that made you read slowly. It described the practice of using a living person as a proxy fuel source for death-anchored magic. Specifically, if a practitioner wished to anchor a piece of magic, a Horcrux being the most extreme example, to the living world permanently, the most stable fuel source was not the practitioner's own life force but the life force of someone who had passed through the death threshold and survived. Because such a person existed, in a sense, on both sides. Their blood was bridge material. "They weren't just stealing power," Harry said. "They were using you as a bridge," Hermione said. "Between the living world and whatever the Horcruxes needed to remain stable. Your blood was the most valuable possible anchor point because she stopped. "Because I touched death and came back," Harry said. "Because you didn't just touch it," Neville said, unexpectedly. Everyone looked at him. He was reading a different section of the same volume, his large hands flat on either side of the page. "It says here, the death sovereignty tradition considers a near-death passage to be contractual. Death allows the passage in exchange for," the text is ambiguous, but the word used is allegiance, and in exchange for that allegiance, the survivor carries death's own authority. Which means, he looked up, and his face was doing the careful, deliberate thinking expression that meant he was working through something important. Which means they weren't just stealing power from Harry. They were stealing from death. Every ritual extraction was taking something that belonged to death's chosen sovereign. The library was very quiet. Somewhere behind them Madame Pants moved between shelves with the silent efficiency of a woman who had been pretending not to listen for 40 years. "That's why the scan showed a claim," Hermione said softly. "It's not a mark. It's a title." Harry sat back in his chair. He thought about that, about the difference between a mark and a title. A mark was something done to you. A title was something you held. What does it mean practically? Ron said. The title. What can Harry actually do? Hermione turned pages. The historical record says, and there are only 2 documented cases, both pre-ministry, that a death sovereign has authority over the threshold. Not necromancy. Not commanding the dead. More like, jurisdiction. Death cannot be weaponized against them. They can sense when the threshold is near, when someone is close to dying. They can speak with the recently dead, those still close to the threshold. And, she stopped at a page and went very still. What? Harry said. They can pull back, she said. Someone at the threshold, someone in the process of dying, a death sovereign can exert authority over that passage. Not heal them. But hold the door, so to speak. Refuse to let the threshold complete. She looked up. It says one of the 2 historical cases, a woman named Morvain the Unbroken, held 47 people at the threshold during a plague year. She sat with each one and simply, would not let them pass. Not through magic. Through authority. Through being death's own, Neville said quietly. Yes, Hermione said. Ron exhaled slowly. Right. Okay. So Harry is basically Death's steward. Sovereign, Hermione corrected. I know what I said, Ron replied. I'm easing into it. Harry looked at the page Hermione had been reading. He read it over, word by word, the same way he'd read the other section last night, carefully, not skimming, taking in each piece as fact rather than as abstract. He found, reading it, that nothing in it surprised him. This was the thing he kept encountering, the information landing not with the shock of revelation but with the weight of recognition. Like reading a description of your own face. The whisper, he said. Hermione looked at him. What whisper? He told them about last night, the sound at the edge of perception, the sense of meaning without words, the way it had cut off at midnight. The ghosts, she said immediately. You noticed the ghosts behaving strangely this morning. They were deferential, Harry said. They can sense it, she said. They've been here for centuries and they know what a death sovereign is, even if they don't have the language for it anymore. The whisper was probably, she thought for a moment. Reverberations. The threshold calling to itself. You're opening up, and the world around you is starting to respond to that. She paused. It'll get stronger. I know, Harry said. He said it with certainty, because he did know, he'd known since waking that morning, since the first ghost had looked at him and the first clean breath had moved through his chest. He could feel it the way you feel a tide, something slow and enormous and entirely natural, moving in its own rhythm, not asking permission. We need to talk about the 3 unclassified markers, Harry said. Hermione's hands went still on the book. I looked up the Dom's signature registry this afternoon, she said, without looking at him immediately. The second code, the one on those 3 markers, it is on the registry. It's not a dark magic signature. She looked at him now, directly. It's a ministry-approved research magic signature. Classified under the header of Authorized Ritual Research for the Greater Public Good. The silence stretched. Greater public good, Ron said, flat. It's a blanket authorization that the Department of Mysteries can issue for, essentially anything, Hermione said. Research that would otherwise be prohibited. Blood ritual extraction for research purposes if carried out under authorized parameters. Authorized, Harry said. By the minister or by a designated senior official. She met his eyes. I don't know who specifically. But the authorization would be on record. We need those records, Harry said. I know. I don't know how to get them. I do, Neville said, and when they looked at him he was sitting very straight with the expression of someone who has information they've been holding on to. My gran. Augusta Longbottom sits on the Wisengamot. She has access to certain ministry archive requests that regular citizens don't. He paused. She's been wanting an excuse to dig into ministry business since what happened to my parents. A beat. She'd do it for Harry. She'd do it in a heartbeat, actually. She's been looking for someone to be furious on behalf of for years, and Harry is an extremely good candidate. Harry looked at Neville for a long moment. Neville looked back, steady and certain, and Harry thought again about the 4 years of watching him sit there and deal with things alone, and felt the same weight and warmth as the night before. Thank you, Harry said. Don't thank me yet, Neville said. My gran is a lot. She can be as much as she wants, Harry said. They left the library at 9. The corridors were quieter now, the castle and its evening winding down, the particular post-dinner hush of hundreds of people moving toward sleep at roughly the same time. Harry walked with Ron and Hermione and Neville, and he was aware, walking the corridors of Hogwarts, that something had changed in the texture of the place. The paintings watched him. The suits of armor seemed to orient slightly toward him as he passed. The torches, and this one he almost dismissed before he decided not to, burned steadier when he moved beneath them, the flame straightening as if at attention. He didn't mention it. He didn't need to. Hermione saw it too, he could tell from the way her eyes moved, and she filed it without comment. On the third-floor corridor, they passed a small knot of students standing outside a classroom, which was strange at this hour. Harry heard the crying before he saw whose crying it was, a first-year, a girl with her back against the wall and her hands covering her face, surrounded by the anxious hovering of 3 or 4 classmates. "What happened?" Hermione said, moving toward them. "She had a seizure," one of the other students said. A boy, second year by the look of him, very pale. "She just fell, and she was shaking, and then she stopped and she won't respond properly. She's awake but she won't." Harry was already moving past Hermione, crouching down beside the girl. She was maybe 11, one of the new first years from the sorting last night, and she was conscious but her eyes were glassy and her breathing was wrong. Not wrong like injury wrong. Wrong like something in her had gone very still at a very deep level. He'd never been near someone at the threshold before. Not like this. He felt it now. Felt it the way you feel a cold draft from an open door. It was coming from her, or rather from somewhere just behind her, the particular cold of a place where the air is thinner. She was at the edge. Her magical core had done something. A spontaneous seizure in a young witch's magic wasn't unusual, he'd read about it, but sometimes the seizure could cascade into a shutdown, and she was. Harry set his hand on the back of hers. Not grabbing. Not gripping. Just placed it there. He didn't use a spell. He didn't have one for this. What he did was something he felt in his chest, a kind of leaning. The way you lean your weight against a door to keep it from blowing open. He felt the threshold, felt the cold draft of it, and he put himself between her and it with the simple authority of someone who owns the space. Not yet, he thought at the cold. She's not yours yet. The cold, retreated wasn't the right word. Withdrew, maybe. Acknowledged. The girl's breathing steadied. Her eyes cleared, slowly, like someone waking from a very deep sleep. She looked at Harry, at his face, close to hers, entirely calm, and she said, in a small and confused voice, "What happened?" "You fainted," Harry said. "You're all right." He stood up. Behind him, Hermione let out a breath she'd been holding. Neville had both hands pressed against the wall, steadying himself, and his expression was the expression of someone who has just watched something they already believed but didn't expect to see confirmed. Ron said nothing. He was looking at Harry with the look he got sometimes when Harry did something that Ron had no framework for, a look that was entirely free of fear and entirely full of, something solid and complicated and loyal in the way only Ron's loyalties could be. "We should get Madame Pomfrey," the second year said. "Yes," Harry said. "Go ahead and get her." The students moved off. The first year was sitting up properly now, color returning, looking dazed but fundamentally okay. Harry watched her for a moment until he was certain. Hermione appeared at his shoulder. "You felt her," she said, quietly. "At the threshold." "Yes." "And you just," she was searching for the vocabulary and didn't quite have it. "I leaned," Harry said. She processed this. "Then, does it hurt? Did it cost you anything?" Harry checked himself, genuinely checked, looking inward the way you check a muscle after using it unexpectedly. There was a faint warmth in his chest, like the warmth after exercise. Not depletion. More like usage. Something working the way it was designed to work. "No," he said. It felt natural. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to find Vane standing at the end of the corridor. She had clearly been heading somewhere else and had stopped. She was looking at the first-year girl, now chatting uncertainly with her classmates, and then at Harry, with those clear gray eyes that processed and catalogued and gave nothing back. "Natural," she repeated. She'd heard. Harry didn't apologize for it. Vane looked at him for a long moment. And then something happened in her face, not the resolution of a hypothesis this time, but something more complicated. Something that looked, if Harry was reading it correctly, like the expression of a scientist who has just encountered data that revises the entire experiment. "Mr. Potter," she said. "I'd like to revise my earlier conversation." "I'm listening," Harry said. "I was sent to assess and contain," she said. It was delivered flatly, without embarrassment, the tone of someone stating operational facts. That is the standard protocol for death magic emergence cases. The department's position is that uncontrolled death magic presents a systemic risk to magical society and that the practitioner should be, she paused. The word in the protocol is managed. "Of course it is," Harry said. "I'm telling you this," Vane said, "because what I just watched you do is not consistent with the systemic risk model. You prevented a death. Without a spell. Without any detectable magical output. You simply prevented it." She looked at him steadily. "My report, when I submit it, will reflect what I actually observed. Not the department's preferred narrative." Harry studied her. "Why?" She was quiet for a moment. "Because I've been in the DOM for 22 years, and I have submitted a great many reports that were shaped by departmental preference rather than fact, and I've watched those reports used to make decisions that I'm not proud of. And because," she stopped. Started again. "You're 15 years old," she said, and this time her voice had something underneath it that the gray eyes hadn't let through until now. "And someone has been cutting into your magical core for your entire life. The least I can do is write the truth." Harry looked at her for a long moment. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "The second signature. The authorized research classification. Do you know whose authorization it was?" Vane held his gaze. She didn't answer immediately. She looked, for the first time since he'd encountered her, like someone who was deciding something, genuinely deciding, weighing something real. "Not yet," she said finally. "But I will." She walked on. Harry watched her go, the precise gray robes, the forgettable face, the clipboard she hadn't looked at once in the entire conversation. "I think she's going to help," Neville said. "Maybe," Harry said. "I think she's going to do her job. And I think her job and helping us might turn out to be the same thing." They went upstairs. Pomfrey swept past them heading for the third-floor corridor, medical bag in hand, without asking what had happened or how the first year was already sitting up when she'd been described as unresponsive. Pomfrey was a professional. She would see the results and draw conclusions the way she always did. In the dormitory, Harry sat on his bed and thought about the threshold. He thought about the cold air of it and the way it had acknowledged him, not obeyed, exactly, but acknowledged, the way a colleague acknowledges a superior's instruction. Recognized the authority of it. He thought about Voldemort's Horcruxes. He thought about blood that had been used as bridge material, his blood, his threshold-touched, death-claimed blood, being used to stabilize anchors of a fractured soul in the land of the living. Those anchors were made, in part, with his blood. Which meant, in the logic of the death sovereignty tradition, he picked up the old book Hermione had left with him and turned to the section on sovereign claims. What was taken from the sovereign without consent remains, in all matters of magical law predating the ministry's establishment in 1707, the property of the sovereign. Blood, life force, soul-adjacent energy, or threshold authority extracted or transferred through ritual without consent carries a debt claim that supersedes all subsequent ritual use of that material. He read that twice. He thought, someone built Voldemort's Horcruxes stronger using stolen material. Under pre-ministry magical law, ancient law, the kind that the ministry had never successfully superseded because some laws were older than institutions, that stolen material was still his. Which meant the things it had been used to build were subject to his claim. Which meant, he closed the book. He lay back on the bed with his hands behind his head and he stared at the dark canopy above him and he thought about all of it, the 28 rituals and the structural damage and the threshold and the ghosts and the girl on the corridor floor and Vane's grey eyes and Dumbledore's calculating silence and the 3 unclassified markers with the authorized research signature, and he let it all sit in his chest, heavy and real and entirely his, and he was not afraid of any of it. Outside, the whisper came back. Softer this time. Not directionless, it had a direction. It was coming, Harry understood with the sudden clarity of a thing recognized, from every direction at once. From the walls of the castle, where 1,000 years of death had soaked into the stone. From below, from the lake, from the grounds. From the portraits and the suits of armor and the staircases. Not calling to him. Acknowledging him. He listened to it for a long while. It had the rhythm of breathing. Of something very old settling into a comfortable configuration, the way a house settles at night, creak and shift and the deep-groaned exhale of ancient timber, except this was not timber. This was every threshold that had ever been crossed in Hogwarts Castle since the first stone was laid, all of them, all at once, very quietly, turning toward the boy in the Gryffindor dormitory like flowers toward the sun. He fell asleep to the sound of it. And this time, he dreamed. He stood in a corridor that wasn't quite any corridor he knew, the stone was right, the torches were right, but the proportions were wrong, too large, too old, the ceiling lost in darkness. The torches burned that same blue as the room of requirements fire. At the end of the corridor stood a figure. Not a ghost, ghosts had the pearlescent quality of light through frosted glass. This figure was the opposite, absolutely present, absolutely solid, the most real thing in the space, so real it made everything else look slightly provisional by comparison. It didn't speak. It didn't need to. Harry walked toward it. He wasn't afraid. The cold air that preceded it was the cold he recognized now, the threshold cold, the thin air cold of the place where living ended and something else began, and it was his cold, his domain, and he walked through it the way you walk through your own house in the dark. He stopped 6 feet from the figure and looked at it and the figure looked back and what passed between them was not language and was not magic, exactly, and was not a vision or a message or any of the things dreams usually constructed. It was a handshake. It was the formal recognition of one authority by another. When Harry woke, the whisper was gone. The dormitory was morning gray and quiet. Ron was still asleep. The curtains around Neville's bed were drawn. Harry sat up, and the warmth in his chest, the usage warmth from the corridor last night, had settled into something else. Something that felt like foundation. Like the thing that was underneath all the other things, the thing that didn't move when everything else shifted. He picked up the parchment with the scan results from his bedside table. He read the list of 28 markers. Then he took out a fresh piece of parchment and began to write a letter. Not to Dumbledore. Not to the Ministry. Not to any of the people who had, in various ways, decided that Harry Potter was a resource to be managed rather than a person to be respected. He wrote to Augusta Longbottom. He wrote clearly and factually and without dramatics, and he listed what he knew and what he needed, and at the end of the letter he wrote, I understand this may put you in a difficult position. I want you to know that I'm not asking you to act against anyone. I'm asking you to help me find out the truth about what was done to me, so that I can decide for myself what to do about it. I think that's a reasonable thing to ask. I also think, given everything, that you might understand why I'd rather find out the truth before anyone has the chance to explain it to me. He sealed the letter. He addressed it. He set it beside his bag to give to the Ollery after breakfast. Then he got dressed, and went down to face the day, and the torches in the Gryffindor common room burned very steady and very blue for just a moment as he walked beneath them, and then went back to their ordinary orange, and no one who was asleep noticed. Harry noticed. He noted it, tucked it away, and went to breakfast. Chapter 3, Lord of the Quiet Places. The thing about power, Harry was learning, was that it didn't announce itself. It just showed up and started working. He noticed it first in the way sound moved around him. Not that the castle went quiet when he walked through it, nothing so dramatic as that. More like the quality of silence in a room changed when he entered it. As if the air made room. As if the ordinary background noise of hundreds of students and enchanted staircases and talking portraits reorganized itself slightly, the way a flock of birds reorganizes around a thermal without any single bird deciding to do so. He noticed it in defense that morning, when the temporary professor, a nervous man named Whitmore who held his wand like it might bite him, asked for a volunteer to demonstrate a shield charm, and every student in the room looked at Harry without meaning to. He noticed it when Draco Malfoy caught him in the corridor after lunch. This had happened before. The version that had happened before involved Malfoy saying something pointed and cruel and Harry responding with escalating frustration until one of them hexed the other or a teacher arrived. That was the pattern. Harry knew the pattern by heart. This time Malfoy stepped into his path in the corridor outside the Great Hall with Crabbe and Goyle flanking him and said, "Had a nice summer, Potter. I heard you had some medical issues." Harry stopped walking. He looked at Malfoy. He looked at the pointed, practiced sneer, the expression Malfoy had been rehearsing since first year, the cruelty of someone performing cruelty because he'd been taught it was strength, and he felt something he hadn't felt in previous Malfoy encounters. Not patience exactly. Not contempt. Just distance. The distance of a person who has larger things on their mind looking at a person who has decided this corridor is the biggest stage they'll ever have. "Yeah," Harry said. He stepped around him and kept walking. That was it. That was the entire encounter. Behind him he heard Malfoy say, "What?" and then nothing, because there was genuinely nothing to respond to. Harry had already turned the corner. Hermione, who'd been beside him for the whole thing, said nothing for a moment. "Then, he's going to find that extremely unsatisfying." "I know," Harry said. "He'll escalate." "Let him," Harry said. He meant it simply. Malfoy escalating was a problem for a future moment and Harry would deal with it in that moment, with the tools available in that moment. It was not worth architecture. Not now. They had bigger architecture. The herbology greenhouse at half-3 was warm and smelled of damp earth and something faintly sulphurous from the venomous tentacula in the far corner that Professor Sprout was coaxing into its annual repotting with the focused attention of someone defusing a device. Harry liked herbology. He always had, though he'd never said so. It was Neville's subject, Neville's domain, and Harry had always felt slightly like a visitor in it. Today Neville worked beside him at the potting bench, and they didn't talk about any of it, about the library or the threshold or Augusta Longbottom. They just planted their hands in the dirt and the smell of growth around them and the simple mechanical satisfaction of doing a physical thing correctly. "She'll have gotten the letter," Neville said, at one point, without looking up from his pot. "This morning," Harry agreed. "She'll reply today. She's not a person who sits on correspondence." "Good." They planted in comfortable silence. At 5 to 4, two things happened almost simultaneously. The first was that a screech owl arrived at the greenhouse window with a letter tied to its leg. It was a very large owl with the rigid bearing of a creature that had spent its entire life in the service of someone who did not tolerate slouching. It waited, with pointed patience, while Neville untied the letter and handed it to Harry. The handwriting on the envelope was forceful. The kind of handwriting that didn't ask whether it had the right address, it simply asserted it. For Harry James Potter, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, Greenhouse 2. Harry opened it. "Mr. Potter, your letter was direct and sensible. I appreciate direct and sensible. I have already made 3 inquiries through my Wisengamot contact. I will have preliminary information for you by Thursday. I will come to Hogwarts with it rather than committing it to Owl Post. You were right to suspect that certain information should not travel on the open mail network. My grandson speaks well of you. He has never spoken well of anyone who didn't deserve it, so I will extend you the same courtesy and assume you are not wasting my time. I am not a subtle woman, Mr. Potter, so I will tell you plainly, what you described in your letter made me angry. I intend to do something about that anger in a productive direction. I trust you will give me the opportunity to do so. Regards, Augusta Longbottom. Harry read it twice, folded it, pocketed it, and looked at Neville. Yeah, Neville said, before Harry could speak. She's like that. She's coming Thursday, Harry said. Neville nodded. He looked, the word was proud, Harry thought. Not the self-conscious pride of someone associating themselves with a powerful figure. The simple, deep pride of a person whose family member has done what that family member always does. The second thing happened while Harry was still standing at the potting bench with dirt on his hands and Augusta Longbottom's letter in his pocket. It started as sound, the particular sharp sound that travels in a greenhouse, bouncing off the glass panels. The crash of a pot followed immediately by a voice, high and panicked. Professor Sprout. Harry was moving before the sentence finished. Not because he'd decided to, but because the cold was there again, sudden and directional, clear as a compass needle. Someone at the far end of the greenhouse, behind the venomous tentacula, and the threshold was. He pushed through the tangle of students clustering at the crash and found Professor Sprout already kneeling on the stone floor. Beside her, a sixth-year Harry vaguely recognized, a Hufflepuff boy, solidly built, not someone who looked like he'd fall, was crumpled against the side of the potting bench, and the tentacula had one of its tendrils wrapped around his forearm. I need the counteragent, Sprout was saying sharply. Someone get, it's not just the venom, Harry said, already kneeling. Sprout looked at him. Mr. Potter, this is, the venom accelerated something that was already happening, Harry said. He had the boy's wrist in his fingers, the pulse there was wrong, too slow, skipping, and the cold off him was strong. Strong and close. He has a heart condition. How do you possibly, he's at the threshold, Harry said simply. I can feel it. He didn't give Sprout time to argue with this because there wasn't time. He set both hands flat on the boy's chest, not over the heart, not dramatically, just flat on the sternum, the most direct path, and he did the thing that wasn't a spell. The leaning. The placement of himself between the boy and the door. Not yet, he thought at the cold. He's not ready. He doesn't know he's here yet. Give it back. The cold pushed. It pushed with a kind of patient, enormous pressure, the pressure of something that has never been denied, the pressure of gravity or tide, and Harry pushed back with the simple authority of someone who owns the room. The cold acknowledged him. The boy's heart kicked. Once, hard, like a door slamming. Then again. Then into rhythm. His eyes opened. He looked at Harry, confused, disoriented, the particular blankness of someone who has been somewhere else and has come back to find the ceiling of a greenhouse above them, and Harry sat back on his heels and took his hands off the boy's chest and the cold retreated like a tide going out, clean and complete. Sprout was looking at Harry with an expression that had moved through shock and was now somewhere in the territory of the careful, measured attention of someone revising a long-held understanding. Mr. Potter, she said. He needs St. Mungo's, Harry said. The venom didn't cause the problem, but it'll mask the symptoms. He needs a cardiac healer. He stood up, wiped his hands on his greenhouse apron. Quickly. Sprout was already on her feet, already moving. She was a fast mover for a woman of her build, decisive and efficient. Everyone out, she said to the greenhouse at large. Now. You, Marcus, can you stand? Marcus, that was his name, Harry caught it, could stand. He stood shakily, holding the potting bench, and he looked at Harry with the uncertain expression of someone who doesn't know what happened to them and isn't sure they want to. Thank you, he said. Go with Professor Sprout, Harry said. He watched them go. The greenhouse emptied. Neville appeared at his elbow, having materialized from somewhere in the cluster of retreating students. Third time in 3 days, Neville said. Second, Harry said. The first year in the corridor wasn't dying. She was close, but not, third time you felt it, Neville said. Harry thought about that. The first year in the corridor. The boy Marcus just now. And the dream, the figure at the end of the blue torch corridor, and what had passed between them. Third time, he agreed. They cleaned up the greenhouse. The tentacula had knocked over 3 pots in the commotion and sat now in the corner with its tendrils pulled inward, looking, Harry was possibly projecting, slightly chastened. Outside, the grounds were golden with late afternoon light. September had arrived and Hogwarts had put on its autumn colors, the trees along the lakeside going amber at the edges. Harry and Neville walked back to the castle in the easy quiet of people who have passed through something together and don't need to talk about it yet. "Gran's coming Thursday," Neville said eventually. "Yes. She's going to ask you questions." "Good." Neville stopped walking. Harry stopped too. Neville had the expression of someone who has been carrying something for a while and has decided now is the time to put it down. "My parents," he said. Harry waited. "They're not dead," Neville said. "They're at St. Mungo's. They've been there since I was a year old. And I've spent my whole life being told that's one kind of tragedy. The almost dead kind. The kind where there's no threshold to speak of, because they never crossed it." He looked at the ground, and then at Harry. "Can you feel them? Could you tell if they're close to the threshold? Or if they're somewhere between it?" Harry understood, then, what Neville had been carrying. All of it, the 4 years of watching, the sudden decision to help, the joining without hesitation, the way he'd stood in the library reading about death's sovereignty with the focused attention of someone with personal stakes. "I don't know yet," Harry said. It was the honest answer. "I don't know the full range of what I can sense and what I can't. But," he held Neville's gaze. "I'll try. When I know more about what I'm doing, I'll try." Neville nodded. His jaw was set and his eyes were clear and he didn't say thank you, which was the right call, because this wasn't the kind of thing you thanked someone for. This was the kind of thing that went between 2 people and stayed there. They went inside. The castle in the evening had a different quality than the castle during the day, the student population redistributed from collective to individual, scattered through common rooms and corridors and the library, and the background noise softened to something more like a house settling than a crowd moving. Harry moved through it and the torches moved with him. Not obviously, he'd checked, standing still and watching them, and they didn't flare or change color unless he was close to them, within about 6 feet. Just a steadying. A quality of attention in the light. Luna was sitting on the floor of the 5th-floor corridor with her back against the wall and a copy of Advanced Rune Translation open in her lap. This was not a remotely unusual place to find Luna. She was the kind of person who sat in corridors with books the way most people sat in chairs, with complete unself-consciousness about the arrangement. She looked up when Harry walked by. "Harry," she said, in the particular tone she had for stating facts. "You're brighter than yesterday." He stopped. "Brighter? You were quite dim when you arrived," she said. "Not your personality. You yourself. The light around you was very thin." She cocked her head. "Now it's stronger. Like someone opened a window." Harry crouched down to be at eye level with her. Luna didn't make this weird, because Luna never made anything weird. She had the remarkable quality of treating all phenomena, conventional or otherwise, with the same level of interested curiosity. "How long have you been able to see that?" he asked. "Since 3rd year," she said. "You had a very peculiar light even then. Different from other people. More layered. Like you existed on more frequencies than most people." She considered him. "But it was very thin. Squeezed." She made a gesture with her hands, a compression, a constriction. Someone had been squeezing it. "Yes," Harry said. "And now they've stopped." "The squeezing is still there," Harry said. "But I know about it now." "And knowing about it, changes the relationship to it," Luna said, with the tone of someone confirming a thing she already knew. "Yes. That would do it." She looked at him steadily with her large eyes. "You should know that the Thestrals can see you. Thestrals can see everyone. No, they can't. They can see people who've seen death. You could always see them. She paused. Now they can see you seeing death. There's a difference. They've been standing at the edge of the forest and watching the castle since yesterday. Her tone shifted slightly, became more careful. They're not frightened. They're attentive. The way they get during a storm, when they fly out to watch the lightning. Witnesses, Harry said. Yes, Luna said. That's exactly the right word. She smiled at him, the specific knowing smile from the feast, the one that had made the hair on his neck rise. I'm glad it's you, she said. Some things were made for particular people. I'm glad this particular thing found the right one. Harry looked at her for a moment. How long have you known? Since third year, she said again. When you produced your Patronus. A Patronus that large, that bright, cast by someone that young, there's only one kind of core that can do that at 13. A core with access to something older than learned magic. She went back to her rune translation with the easy finality of someone concluding a conversation that has reached its natural end. You should probably eat something. You've been expending quite a lot this week. Harry stood up. Luna. If I need to talk to someone who's already thought about this, I'm usually in the corridor, she said, not looking up. He went to dinner. The great hall that evening had the comfortable rhythm of a school in full swing, the noise level calibrated to 100 overlapping conversations, the food appearing in the reliable Hogwarts way, the enchanted ceiling showing stars beginning to emerge in a deepening blue sky. Harry sat with Ron and Hermione and ate and listened to the table's conversation and felt, underneath all of it, the whisper of the castle around him, steady and constant, the way you hear the sound of the sea from inside a house near the shore. Hermione had been in the library again. She had the look. The restricted section has a subsection, she said, quiet and fast, leaning across Ron who bore this with the resignation of a person used to being a geographic obstacle in other people's conversations. I'd missed it yesterday because it's behind a concealment charm. But Madame Pants let it slip when I asked about pre-ministry magical law, and I found, she stopped and glanced around, and lowered her voice further. I found the full death sovereignty lineage records. Harry. There are only 2 confirmed historical cases and then, you. They're not calling it confirmed yet, but the scan results and the records, it fits. Every aspect of the tradition fits. What else does the lineage say? Harry said. The sovereign's abilities develop in stages, she said. The first stage is awareness, sensing the threshold, being sensed by the dead. You've already got that. She was reading from notes she'd made in her small, precise handwriting. The second stage is intervention, holding the threshold against an unwanted passage. Which you've done twice. She looked up. The third stage is the one the records are less clear about. The language used is, sovereign claim. The ability to identify and reclaim what was taken from you. Not vengeance. Not retribution. The simple legal and magical assertion that stolen material, belongs to me, Harry said. In the ancient tradition, yes. And anything built from that material is subject to your authority. She held his gaze. Harry. The Horcruxes. I know, Harry said. You could, the records suggest, I know, Harry said again. He wasn't brushing her off. He was telling her that he'd gotten there already, that he'd been sitting with it, that he understood the shape of it. Her eyes said she knew that, and she let it go. Ron had been eating steadily through this conversation and now said, without preamble, how many Horcruxes are there? We're not certain, Hermione said. Dumbledore thinks at least 4, Harry said. Possibly more. Ron processed this. And you could just, claim them back. Theoretically, Harry said. That seems like it would end the war significantly faster than anyone currently expects, Ron said. Yes, Harry said. Which is why I'm thinking carefully about it before I do anything. Ron nodded. Right. Yeah. Good thinking. He took a large bite of pie. The bit I keep getting stuck on, he said through it, is the rituals. The ones that weren't Voldemort. The authorized ones. Thursday, Harry said. Augusta Longbottom is coming Thursday with information. Good. Ron swallowed. Because whoever did those, he stopped. His ears went red, which was his tell, the involuntary signal of feelings too large for his usual vocabulary. It should be on record, he said finally. Officially. It should be on a record that doesn't go away. It will be, Harry said. On the other side of the hall, at the staff table, Dumbledore was speaking quietly with Vane. Harry watched them, Dumbledore, warm and attentive, all his considerable charm deployed, Vane, clipboard on the table, grey eyes giving nothing back. Whatever Dumbledore was offering her, reassurance, context, the particular gravitational pull of his authority, Vane was not being pulled. She sat very still with the expression of a woman updating her assessment of a situation she thought she understood. Good, Harry thought. After dinner, McGonagall stopped him in the entrance hall. Mr. Potter, she said. A word. She took him into her office, the Transfiguration Professor's office, with the enormous tartan curtains and the neat towers of essays and the portrait of Godric Gryffindor in the corner that had been sleeping for as long as Harry could remember but was currently very much awake and very much watching. McGonagall closed the door and stood behind her desk with her hands clasped and her expression doing what it always did when she was about to say something she found difficult. It went very still, the way water goes still before it boils. I owe you an apology, she said. Harry blinked. He hadn't expected that first. I was in that room when Poppy read your results, McGonagall said. I should have come to you directly afterward. I should have. I have been telling myself that there are protocols, that the appropriate course is to allow the relevant authorities to manage the situation. She stopped. The still surface trembled slightly. But I've been watching you manage things alone for 4 years, Mr. Potter, and I am not proud of the number of times I've stood aside and let that happen. Harry looked at her. She was not a woman who apologized for things she couldn't help. She apologized for choices, and she was making the distinction clear. I'm asking, she said, with the precision of someone who chooses each word like a tool, what you need from me. Honestly? Harry said. Please. He thought about it. I need you to not tell Dumbledore what I'm doing, he said. Not actively lie to him. But, if he asks, I'd rather he didn't know the details until I'm ready. McGonagall was very still for a moment. Then, I can manage that. I also need, when Augusta Longbottom arrives Thursday, I need a place to meet that isn't monitored. My office, she said immediately. Thursday evening, after dinner. I'll ensure the flue is locked to external monitoring. Thank you, Harry said. She looked at him with the expression that had been on her face in Pomfrey's office, the one he hadn't been able to name then. He could name it now. It was the expression of someone seeing a student clearly for the first time and finding, to their complicated feelings, that what they see is someone who no longer needs protection in the way they'd assumed. Someone who has become something else entirely. You remind me, she said quietly, mostly to herself, of your father at moments. I hope I'm a bit calmer than he was, Harry said. The corner of her mouth moved. Just barely. You're considerably calmer, she said. Which is either a very good sign or a very alarming one. Both, probably, Harry said. He went back upstairs. The castle was quieting for the night, the corridors thinning out, the noise of hundreds of students fading towards sleep. Harry walked the familiar path to Gryffindor Tower and felt the torches straighten as he passed them, felt the stone walls conduct some quality of awareness toward him, felt the whisper begin its nightly settling. He was halfway up the 7th floor staircase when he felt it. Not the threshold, not a person dying. Something different. Something that was coming from below and behind him, from the direction of the dungeons, and it wasn't cold. It was, he didn't have a word for it. Hot, maybe, but in the metaphorical sense, the way you describe something on fire from a long way off. He stopped on the staircase. He turned and looked at the space below him, at the empty corridor and the shifting staircases, and he waited, feeling it. It was rage. Not human rage, something larger, less controlled, the elemental version of the thing that human beings called anger. It was coming from deep in the dungeons, and it was, Harry frowned. He came back down the stairs and followed the feeling the way you follow a sound, orienting by intensity, moving toward rather than away from it. The logical thing was to go to bed. The logical thing was not to walk toward unknown sources of magical rage alone in a castle at 9 at night. He walked toward it. The dungeons were cold and lamplit and empty. The stone down here had a different feel than the upper floors, older, somehow, more saturated, as if it had been absorbing ambient magic longer and had more of it pooled in the walls. The torches down here burned steadily as he passed. He went deeper, past the potions classroom, past the Slytherin common room entrance, into the part of the dungeons that students didn't normally access. The feeling was coming from behind a door he'd never seen opened. Unremarkable door, iron-banded, no nameplate. He stopped in front of it and felt the rage through it, closer now, more defined. It had layers. Underneath the anger was something that felt, when Harry pressed his awareness at it, like grief. He knocked. A pause. Then, flatly, from inside, "Who's there?" "Potter," Harry said. Another pause, longer. "Why?" "Because I felt you from the 7th floor and I wanted to make sure nothing was burning down." He paused. Metaphorically. A much longer pause. Then the door opened. Snape stood in the doorway of what turned out to be a private laboratory, workbenches along the walls, cauldrons in various states of use, shelves of ingredients, the smell of potions in multiple stages of brewing. His expression was the expression he wore as default, dark and closed and hostile, but underneath it, present and unmistakable if you were reading what was underneath people's expressions rather than what was on the surface, was something raw. He looked at Harry the way he always looked at Harry. Then something shifted, the same recalibration Harry had been seeing in various forms for 3 days, in different people, the update of assessment. "You shouldn't be in this part of the castle," Snape said. "Probably not," Harry said. "Are you all right?" Snape's expression did something complicated and brief that resolved back into hostility. "I am not one of your projects, Potter." "I know," Harry said. He wasn't offended. He wasn't anything, standing in the dungeon corridor, looking at Snape. "I wasn't asking as a project. I was asking because you felt like you were tearing something apart in there, and I've spent 4 years being surprised by the things no one told me, and I've decided to pay attention now instead." Snape looked at him. In the torchlight the dark eyes were very dark and whatever was living in them was old and complicated and entirely his own. "Go to bed, Potter," he said. "Okay," Harry said. He turned to go. Then, "Snape." "What?" "Whatever it is," he considered how to say this. "Whatever the source of it. I know it's not simple and I'm not going to pretend I understand it. But you're not the only person in this castle who knows something's wrong and has been watching it happen for years." He paused. "That's all." He walked back down the corridor and up the dungeon stairs and didn't look back. Behind him, the door to Snape's laboratory didn't close for a long time. In the Gryffindor dormitory, Hermione had left a note on Harry's pillow. It read, "Found a reference to the 3rd stage of death sovereignty development. The record says, the sovereign does not need to seek what belongs to them. When the time comes, what was taken announces itself. I think that means the Horcruxes will respond to you. When you're ready. They'll know." Harry read it twice. Then he put it on the bedside table beside the parchment with the ritual markers. He lay in the dark and thought about 28 thefts and what had been built from them. He thought about Voldemort's fractured soul, stabilized and maintained with blood that belonged, under every tradition older than the Ministry, to Harry. He thought about what it meant that the anchors of that fractured soul were made partly from his material. He thought about Thursday. About Augusta Longbottom and the authorized signatures and the names that would be on the record she pulled. He thought about Dumbledore in Pomfrey's office. The calculating silence. "I see." The voice of a man who was not surprised. He thought about Snape in the dungeon laboratory, standing in his own grief and rage, and about the things no one had told Harry, and about the decision he'd made to pay attention now. He thought about all of it without fear, without rage, without the desperate hot-eyed need that had characterized everything about last year. Just, clear thought. Clean thought. The thought of someone with both feet on solid ground. The whisper started. The castle breathing around him, the threshold acknowledging its sovereign, the long-accumulated weight of Hogwarts settling into its nightly configuration with Harry somewhere at its quiet center. He listened. And somewhere below, in the dungeon laboratory, something in a cauldron simmered with the particular sound of careful, patient work, and Severus Snape sat alone with what he knew and what he'd seen, and made his own calculations in the dark. And in the forest, at the edge of the trees, a small herd of thestrals stood with their leathery wings folded and their pale eyes turned toward the lit windows of the castle, witnessing, as Luna had said they would, in the way of creatures who exist between two states of being and recognize a third. And at the threshold, everywhere, always, something that was not quite presence and not quite absence held its own steady watch, and waited for Thursday, and for the names that would come with it, and for the moment when Harry Potter would understand the full weight of what had been done to him and decide, with clear eyes and no fear, what to do about it. Chapter 4. The names on the rituals. Thursday arrived the way significant days sometimes do, quietly, without any outward ceremony, the castle going about its ordinary business entirely unaware that something was about to shift. Harry got through his morning classes with the focused patience of someone counting down hours. Charms with Flitwick, who had him practicing summoning charms with the cheerful obliviousness of a man whose happiness was structurally immune to the surrounding atmosphere. Herbology, which smelled of earth and growth, and where Professor Sprout watched Harry with a new quality of attention she was too professional to act on. A free period before lunch that Harry spent in the library with Hermione, cross-referencing the preministry legal code she'd found against the specific language in the death sovereignty records. The legal angle was Hermione's contribution, and it was, Harry was increasingly certain, the most important one. The Wisengamot Charter of 1707, she said, spreading parchments across the table with the systematic energy of someone building an argument. When the ministry was formally established, the old magical law traditions weren't repealed. They were superseded in theory, but never formally invalidated. Which means they still exist as legal foundation. The ministry sits on top of them the way a building sits on bedrock. She looked up. If you assert a sovereign claim under the pre-1707 traditions, the ministry can't actually override it. Not legally. They can try, politically, but the legal foundation is older than they are, Harry said. Older than they are by several centuries, Hermione said, with the particular satisfaction of someone who has found a very large legal hammer. The claim of sovereign injury specifically. I found the full text. It's not a lawsuit, Harry, it's more like an assertion of natural right. You don't file it with the ministry. You assert it before the Wisengamot directly. And because of the Wisengamot's own founding charter, they're obligated to hear it. Obligated, Harry repeated. It says, and I'm quoting, no claim brought under the sovereign traditions shall be dismissed, deferred, or subjected to administrative delay, as such traditions exist prior to and in supersession of all procedural machinery established thereafter. She set the parchment down. They literally cannot table it. They cannot defer it. They have to hear it. Harry thought about Fudge. About the ministry that had spent all of last year calling him a liar and a disturbed child. About Umbridge, who was currently on the incoming staff list, a fact that had arrived with the term timetable and sat at the back of Harry's mind like a splinter he hadn't dealt with yet. He thought about the Wisengamot hearing a sovereign claim from Harry Potter and the political chaos that would follow, and he thought, good. After Thursday, he said. When we have the names. After Thursday, Hermione agreed. Luna appeared at the end of their library table at 11:20, which was during her divination class, which she was apparently not attending. She sat down with the naturalness of someone joining a conversation they'd been part of all along, opened her copy of the Quibbler to a middle page, and said, without looking up, "Aldrich Vane is in the Ministry archives right now." Harry and Hermione both looked at her. "She fled out at 10 this morning," Luna said. "I saw her from the divination tower window. She had her clipboard. She turned a page. She looked like someone who'd made a decision." "How do you know she went to the Ministry archives specifically?" Hermione said. "I don't," Luna said serenely. "But where else would she go with that expression?" She had a point. "She's pulling the records herself," Harry said. He thought about the conversation in the classroom. "My report will reflect what I actually observed," and about the look on Vane's face when she'd said it. The look of someone settling an old account with themselves. "She's going to come back with something." "Two sources," Hermione said, meaning Augusta Longbottom and Vane, converging on the same information from different directions. Her expression was the expression of someone watching Annette close. "Good," Harry said. The day moved. He went to lunch. He ate without tasting much, which wasn't unusual for days with countdowns in them. Ron sat beside him and talked about the Quidditch tryouts with the sustained enthusiasm of someone who had decided, apparently, that the best way to support his best friend through a complicated situation was to provide a constant stream of normal conversation, which was more valuable than Ron probably knew. At the Ravenclaw table, Luna was eating an apple and reading upside down and had apparently decided she was done with Thursday's classes, because she showed no signs of going anywhere. Across the hall, at the Slytherin table, Malfoy was watching Harry with the frustrated expression of someone whose escalation strategy had not yet produced a response. Harry didn't look at him. At the staff table, Snape was eating. He looked the same as always, dark, closed, professionally hostile to the concept of mealtimes. But he glanced at Harry once during lunch, and the look lasted slightly longer than it should have, and Harry received it the way he'd been receiving everything this week, as information. Filed. Processed. Something was happening with Snape. Harry didn't know what yet, but it was something. Umbridge arrived at dinner. She walked into the Great Hall at 6:30 with the Ministry's approval order in one hand and a small, determined smile that had nothing warm in it, and took the seat at the staff table that had been set for the incoming defense professor, and Dumbledore introduced her with the smooth courtesy of a man who had invited something into his castle and was entirely at peace with it. Hermione, to Harry's left, went rigid. Harry looked at Umbridge. Pink cardigan, neat hair, the wide smiling face of a person who had decided a long time ago that pleasantness was the most effective mask for cruelty. The face of an administrator. The face of someone who believed that rules were a tool for managing people who couldn't manage themselves. He'd been afraid of her, before. Not in the simple physical sense, she didn't scare him the way danger scared him. But in the subtler way, the way that bureaucratic authority scares people who have learned that it's very hard to fight someone who holds their pen. The Ministry had called him a liar all year. Umbridge had been part of that. And she was here now, in his school, with her toad smile and her pink cardigan, and Harry looked at her the way he'd looked at Malfoy in the corridor. The way you look at a smaller problem when you've already measured the larger ones. He picked up his fork. "She's going to be a problem," Hermione said quietly. "Probably," Harry said. "She's here to monitor you specifically. She's a Ministry plant." "I know. Harry, she can monitor whatever she wants," Harry said. He ate his dinner. "After Thursday, the Ministry is going to have significantly larger problems than whether I'm behaving myself in defense class." Hermione looked at him for a moment. Then she went back to her food, and the small, controlled, fierce expression on her face was not quite a smile but it was close. McGonagall's office at 7 Thursday evening. Augusta Longbottom arrived via flu at 5 past the hour, stepping out of the fireplace with the precision of a woman who considered flu powder a mild inconvenience beneath her dignity. She was exactly what her letter had suggested, tall, upright, formidably hatted, the kind of person who walked into rooms as though she had assessed them and found them adequate. She looked at Harry for 1 second, the way Vane had looked at him, the assessment, and then she said, "You look like your father. Sit down." Harry sat. Neville, beside him, was sitting with the slightly rigid posture of a person who loves someone very much and is also slightly terrified of them. McGonagall had tea already prepared, which for her was an act of hospitality that bordered on ceremonial. Hermione sat to Harry's left with her notebook. Ron sat to his right with the focused expression of someone who had decided that this meeting was too important for any of his usual contributions. Augusta opened her bag and produced a folder of documents. The folder was thick. "I've been a member of the Wisengamot for 18 years, she said, without preamble. "In that time I have made requests through official channels and I've made requests through unofficial ones. The information in this folder came through both." She set it on McGonagall's desk and looked at Harry. "What I'm about to tell you is on record in the Ministry archives. It is not classified, not because someone decided it shouldn't be, but because whoever arranged these rituals was confident it would never be looked for. Confident that the right people would never ask the right questions." Her jaw set. "They miscalculated." She opened the folder. The first page was a Ministry archive record, official letterhead, dates, authorization signatures. Augusta set it facing Harry. "Blood ritual extractions require an authorization code if performed by any Ministry-affiliated practitioner," she said. "Unauthorized ritual extraction is a Class 1 offense. But authorized extraction, authorized under the Greater Public Good Clause, which was established in 1943 and has never been successfully challenged, can be performed without the subject's consent, provided a senior official signs off." Harry looked at the authorization record. His name was on it. His full name, listed as the ritual subject, and the authorization was dated, the first one, from when he was 18 months old. "Who signed it?" he said. His voice was steady. He was glad his voice was steady. Augusta's finger moved to the signature line. The room was very quiet. The name on the authorization was not Voldemort's. Voldemort had no Ministry affiliations, no authorization codes, no official records. The name on the authorization for the ritual extraction of blood from Harry James Potter, 18 months old, was a Ministry official Harry didn't recognize. But the name on the second authorization was one he did. "Bartemius Crouch Sr., Harry said. "Head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement at the time," Augusta said. "Who also, as you may know, had some complicated relationships with the practitioners of dark magic during the First War." She turned to the next page. 3 authorizations bear his signature. 2 more, from later, bear signatures of officials who have since been quietly retired. 1 is signed by someone who is currently serving in the Department of Mysteries. She let that land. "That's 13, Harry said. "Voldemort-adjacent signatures on 12, Crouch on 3, others on the rest, that's closer to the 28. "Not quite," Augusta said. She turned to the last section of documents. The final group of authorizations. She set the page down. There were 3 of them. The dates corresponded with the 3 unclassified markers on Pomfrey's scan. The ones Pomfrey hadn't annotated. The ones with the signature Harry had suspected since the first night. He looked at the signature. He looked at it for a moment. Just a moment. Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. 3 authorizations. 2 from Harry's childhood, 1 from the year he'd first come to Hogwarts, 1 from the summer of his 2nd year. 1 from 2 years ago. All 3 under the Greater Public Good Clause. All 3 citing the same research objective, stabilization of protective magical anchors relating to the subject's unique connection to defeating the Dark Lord. Harry read the research objective again. Stabilization of protective magical anchors. Not stabilization of Voldemort's anchors. Stabilization of protective ones. Different language. Different purpose, or so the paperwork said. But the signature in his magical core didn't lie about what the extraction had fed. Pomfrey's scan didn't lie about where the power had gone. The room waited. Harry put the page down on McGonagall's desk. He aligned it precisely with the edge of the desk. He looked at it for a moment and then looked at the fire in the grate, which was burning very steadily, the same blue-tinged quality it sometimes had around him. He signed it twice before I arrived at Hogwarts, Harry said. Yes, Augusta said. And once after. Yes. Harry nodded. It was a single, small nod, the movement of someone marking a fact. He didn't feel the hot rage he'd felt at various points in his life, the rage of the boy who'd been told not enough, not yet, not your business. What he felt was something colder and, in its way, more absolute. The feeling of a door closing completely. McGonagall had not moved since Augusta produced the final page. She was standing by the window with her hands clasped in her face doing the perfectly still thing, but her eyes were not still. Her eyes were the eyes of a woman who had loved someone for a very long time and was, in this moment, measuring the distance between who she'd loved and who she was looking at. Neville's hand had gone flat on his knee. The large, deliberate stillness of someone containing something. Hermione was writing. She wrote everything down, always, because writing it made it real and permanent and out of the space where people could revise it. Her pen moved quickly and she didn't look at Harry while she wrote and he didn't need her to. Ron said, "I want to hit something." "I know," Harry said. "I'm not going to," Ron said. I want to be clear that's where I am." "I know," Harry said again. There was something almost gentle in his voice. Augusta was watching Harry. She had been watching him since the documents went on the table, with the attention of a woman calibrating a situation in real time. She said, "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to speak to him," Harry said. "I'd recommend legal action first." "I'm going to speak to him first," Harry said. Not sharply. Not loudly. With the finality of a decision already made. "I'd like to look at him when he explains it. Before anything else happens. I'd like to see what explanation he thinks is adequate." Augusta held his gaze. Then she nodded, once, with the nod of someone who understands the difference between justice and process and is willing to let the person most affected choose the sequence. "I'll pursue the ministry angle in parallel," she said. "The archived authorizations are on record. I can bring a formal inquiry before the Wisengamot, not a claim, yet, just an inquiry, which still requires a mandatory response. It starts the clock. Thursday next week," Harry said. "Give me until then." "Done," Augusta said. She gathered her documents with the efficient certainty of someone who has made a plan and considers planning the appropriate response to outrage. She looked at Neville while she packed them. Something passed between them, the complicated current between a grandmother and a grandson who have never been easy together and have always loved each other, and Neville sat straighter under it. "You chose well," she said to him. "Not sentimentally. As a fact." "I know," Neville said. She went back through the flue and was gone. The fire settled back to its ordinary color. McGonagall turned from the window. She looked at Harry with the expression she'd had in Pomfrey's office, the one he could now name as the expression of a person who has tried to protect someone and understands, finally and completely, that protection wasn't what they needed. That what they needed was truth, which was a different and less comfortable thing. "I need to say something," she said. "All right," Harry said. "I have known Albus Dumbledore for 40 years. She said it carefully, the way you carry something fragile. I have always believed, that his love for the students in his care, for the cause he fights for you specifically, is genuine. I do not doubt the love." "Neither do I," Harry said. She blinked. This was not the response she'd expected. "That's what makes it complicated," Harry said. If he didn't love me, it would be simple. I could just be angry. But he does, and he still. Harry stopped. He thought about the right words. He loves the cause more, he said finally. He loves the outcome. He loves the version of the future where everything works out, and he loves me as the instrument of that future. And an instrument that's necessary doesn't get to also be a person. Not fully. He paused. I don't think he knows he's doing it. McGonagall was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was very careful. That is a remarkably generous reading of a man who signed authorization for magical theft from you as an infant. It's not generous, Harry said. It's just, accurate. And I need to be accurate about it before I go talk to him, because if I go in angry I'll say things that are true but not useful, and if I go in forgiving I'll let him manage me again. He stood. I need to be exact. About what happened and about what I want from him now. He picked up the copy of the authorization records that Hermione had made. She'd made copies the moment they'd arrived on the desk, because of course she had, and he folded them and put them in his bag. Thank you, he said to McGonagall. For your office. For the tea. He paused. For the form you signed without asking what it was for. She made a sound that was not quite a word. He left. Hermione fell into step beside him in the corridor. Ron was on the other side. Neville was slightly behind them, quiet, processing his own version of tonight. You're going now? Hermione said. Not tonight, Harry said. I need to sleep on it. I need to be, what I said in there. He glanced at her. Exact. She nodded. She knew the word exact when she heard it. They walked upstairs. The torches burned steady. The castle breathed. Harry walked through it and felt it around him, the weight of 1,000 years of stone and magic, the threshold sense like a constant gentle hum at the back of his awareness, the whisper of accumulated death that was his domain and which acknowledged him at every step. He went to bed. He didn't sleep immediately. He lay in the dark with the folded authorization records on the bedside table beside the scan results, those two pieces of paper that together told the story of 15 years of managed harm, and he looked at the canopy of his bed and thought about Dumbledore. Not about what Dumbledore had done. He'd thought about that enough. He thought about the conversation, about what he wanted from it. Not revenge. Not confession. Not even apology, exactly. He wanted Dumbledore to look at him as a person. Not an instrument. Not a weapon. Not the boy who lived or the one with the power to defeat the Dark Lord or the key to the outcome that made everything else worth it. He wanted Dumbledore to look at him and see Harry, and to reckon with what had been done to Harry, and to carry that reckoning. He wanted the truth to exist between them without being managed. He fell asleep. The dream came again, the blue torch corridor, the ancient stone, the overwhelming realness of the figure at the end of it. But this time Harry didn't walk toward the figure. He stood where he was and the figure came to him, which felt like a change in protocol, like a change in their relative positions, and when it stopped before him he could feel this clearly, not summoning him. It was reporting to him. He couldn't understand what it said, if it said anything. But the meaning was present without words, the way it always was at the threshold, what was taken, what was owed, what was his. He woke at 6 with the clean, early feeling of a decision made. He dressed. He went downstairs through a sleeping common room, through a sleeping corridor, up the moving staircases toward the top of the castle and the stone gargoyle that guarded the headmaster's office. Sherbet lemon, he said. He'd always known the password and never used it uninvited before. The gargoyle stepped aside. The office was lit, Dumbledore was awake, which didn't surprise Harry. Dumbledore gave the impression of someone who didn't quite sleep the way ordinary people did, as if his relationship with night was more philosophical than physiological. He was at his desk with a cup of tea and an open book, and he looked up when Harry came through the door, and his expression, Harry watched it, carefully, was not surprised. He'd been expecting this visit. Possibly not this morning, possibly not this early. But he'd been expecting it. Harry, he said warmly. Sit down. I'll stand, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. The blue eyes behind the half-moon glasses were very clear in the early morning light, and they were doing the thing they did, the assessment wrapped in warmth, the measurement wrapped in love, the constant recalibration of a man who treated every conversation as a chess position. I imagine, Dumbledore said, that you've had a productive few days. I have, Harry said. He opened his bag and took out the authorization records. He set them on Dumbledore's desk. He didn't spread them out dramatically. He set them down with the same precision he'd aligned them on McGonagall's desk the night before, and he stepped back and stood with his hands loose at his sides. Dumbledore looked at the top page. His expression didn't change. Not a flicker, not a micro-movement. The expression of someone confronting their own handwriting on a document they'd known existed. I see, he said. 3 authorizations, Harry said. Your signature. Under the Greater Public Good Clause. Yes, Dumbledore said. The admission was immediate. No hesitation, no deflection. This was, Harry noted, a deliberate choice. Dumbledore had decided before this conversation began that denial was not the strategy. He'd decided on something else. Harry stayed very still and waited to see what the something else was. I would like, Dumbledore said, to explain. I thought you would, Harry said. Go ahead. Dumbledore set his teacup down. He folded his hands on the desk. In the pre-dawn light of the office, with Fawkes asleep on his perch and the portraits of previous headmasters watching in their dim frames, he looked what he was, very old, very powerful, and carrying something that had the shape of genuine pain. When Voldemort cast the killing curse at you, Dumbledore said, and your mother's sacrifice caused it to rebound, the magical event that followed was not fully understood at the time. I have spent the 14 years since studying it. What the studies revealed was this: the rebound passed through your magical core and left behind a connection. A tether. Not to Voldemort, as I initially believed, but to something older. Something I could not fully identify. Death, Harry said. Dumbledore was very still for a moment. Yes. I came to believe that, eventually. He paused. The first authorization, signed when you were 18 months old, was a research extraction. I needed to study the signature in your core, to understand what it was. To understand whether it made you dangerous, or a target, or, he stopped. Started again. Or whether it was what I increasingly believed it was. The signature of a Death Sovereign, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him with the expression of a man whose student has surpassed his lesson plan by several chapters. You've been thorough, he said. I've had good help, Harry said. Keep going. The subsequent authorizations, Dumbledore said, were not purely research. I will not claim they were. He met Harry's eyes. I still believe, that the connection in your core is the key to defeating Voldemort permanently. Not through conventional combat. Through something more absolute. But that connection needed to be stable. Strong enough. The extractions I authorized were not feeding Voldemort's anchors. The blood I took was used in a containment ritual, to prevent the Death Sovereignty from developing in an uncontrolled way before you were ready to manage it. Harry held Dumbledore's gaze. He let the silence run for a moment. You put a governor on it, Harry said. I was protecting, you put a ceiling on me, Harry said. Same voice. Same even, clear register. Because you believed you knew better than I did what I should be and when I should be it. He paused. And in doing so, you fed blood rituals performed by Voldemort's followers, because those rituals used the same pathways your containment ritual used, and the power had to go somewhere when it couldn't develop naturally. Dumbledore was very still. Something moved behind his eyes, pain, genuine pain, and the specific quality of pain that belongs to a person who has just seen clearly a consequence they had not followed through to its conclusion. I did not intend, he began. I know, Harry said. I believe you. He leaned slightly forward. That's the part one keep coming back to. You didn't intend to. You did it anyway. You made choices about my body and my magic and my development, for my entire life, without asking me, and you told yourself it was necessary, and you never considered that the most basic thing you could do to protect someone is tell them the truth about what's happening to them and let them decide. Dumbledore was quiet. I'm not going to hate you for it, Harry said. I don't think hate is the right, it's not useful. And I do believe you love me. But I need you to understand something very clearly, right now, in this room, before anything else happens. He held Dumbledore's gaze with the absolute steadiness of someone who is not asking for anything, who is only stating a fact. I am not an instrument. I'm not a strategy. I'm not the sacrificial element in a plan. I am a person, and what was done to me was wrong, regardless of the intention, and going forward, every decision about my magic, my body, my development, my role in this war, those are my decisions. Not yours. The office was very quiet. Fawkes shifted on his perch, his feathers rustling. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long time. Not the assessment look. Not the warm management look. Something under all of it, something that was just an old man looking at a boy he loved, and recognizing, perhaps for the first time, that the boy had grown up without him having the grace to notice. You're right, Dumbledore said. Harry waited. He'd expected more than this, some gentle qualification, some pivot toward the greater good, some redirection toward the urgency of the war. He waited for it. It didn't come. I have been, Dumbledore said, slowly, treating you as a responsibility I was managing rather than a person I was serving. I have known this, on some level, for longer than I've been comfortable admitting. He paused. And I have continued anyway, because the alternative, telling you everything, giving you full agency, accepting that you might make choices I couldn't control, felt, to me, more dangerous than the alternative. Than the alternative of doing what you did, Harry said. Yes. The word cost something. Harry could see it cost something. That was wrong. The balance I struck was wrong. And the authorizations were, he stopped. There is no adequate language for what the authorizations were, he said. What was done to you, regardless of intent or outcome, was a violation. I need you to know that I understand that. Harry stood very still and felt the truth of that land. Not relief, exactly. Not forgiveness, yet. Something more like, orientation. A landmark. A place on the map that said this is where we actually are rather than where either of them had been pretending. All right, Harry said. What happens now? Dumbledore asked. And here was the thing Harry had been holding since he'd lain awake with the authorization records on the bedside table, the thing that had clarified in the dream, in the acknowledgement of the figure at the end of the Blue Torch corridor. Now, Harry said, I do what I should have been doing from the beginning. I end this war. On my terms, with full knowledge, using everything that's mine, not 60% of it, not the managed version, not the version that fits your strategy. He reached across and picked the authorization records back off Dumbledore's desk and put them in his bag. And you help me. Not because you're my handler. Because you know things I need to know, and because whatever else you are, you're the best magical strategist alive, and I'd rather have you working with me than around me. Dumbledore looked at him. You're offering me a role, he said, and there was something in his voice that Harry had never heard in it before, something almost humble. I'm offering you a chance to actually help, Harry said. Those are different things. He moved toward the door. I'll have questions. A lot of them. About the Horcruxes, about the sovereignty tradition, about the magical law I'm going to use to take the ministry apart. I want honest answers. Not managed ones. You'll have them, Dumbledore said. Harry stopped at the door. He turned back once. The containment ritual you used, he said. It's been removed now. By the scan process or by my development overriding it? Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. The development is overriding it, he said. Naturally. It cannot hold against what you're becoming. Good, Harry said. He went back down the gargoyle steps into the early morning corridor, and the torches straightened as he passed, and the stone walls carried their awareness of him, and the whisper of the castle's threshold ran steady beneath everything like a deep current, and Harry walked through Hogwarts with both feet on solid ground and all of his power flowing for the first time without a ceiling over it. And the warmth in his chest was not the warmth of anger or of relief but the warmth of something. Opening. Hermione was in the common room when he got back, which meant she'd been there for a while, which meant she'd been awake, waiting. She looked up from her notes. Well, she said. He confirmed everything, Harry said. And he's going to help us. She studied his face. Are you all right? Better than all right, Harry said. He sat across from her and looked at the early light coming through the common room windows, the grounds golden with September morning. I know what I'm doing next. I know what all of it is for. He looked at her. The Horcruxes, Hermione. All of them. I need to know where every single one is. She reached immediately for her notes. Of course she had notes. Of course she'd been working on this while she waited. I have 4 confirmed locations, she said. And 2 suspects. She spread the parchments on the low table between them. And I think, Harry, I think when you assert the sovereign claim and the stolen blood is formally recognized as yours, they'll respond to me, Harry said. The record said what was taken announces itself. Yes, she said. So we don't need to find all of them. We just need to be ready, Harry said, when they do. Chapter 5. The War Behind the War. The Ministry of Magic on a Tuesday morning had the particular energy of an institution that believed very deeply in its own importance. The atrium was full, witches and wizards in ministry robes moving with the focused purposefulness of people who had meetings, memos, and the comfortable certainty that the business they were conducting was the business that mattered most in the world. Harry stepped out of the flue at 8:30 and straightened his robes and looked at all of it with clear eyes. He'd been here before, the hearing last year, the panicked scramble of a 15-year-old trying to defend himself against charges that had been designed to make defense impossible. He remembered the way the atrium had looked then, enormous, intimidating, the golden statue in the center broadcasting a particular message about who was important and who was not. He remembered the feeling of being small in it. He didn't feel small now. Hermione came through behind him, then Neville, then Ron, then Augusta Longbottom, who had fled first to her own ministry contact and arrived in the atrium from a different fireplace with the bearing of a woman conducting official Wisengamot business, which is precisely what she was doing. She didn't acknowledge Harry's group in the atrium. Not yet. The staging was deliberate. She'd explained it the previous evening with the tactical precision of someone who had been navigating ministry politics for nearly 2 decades. I file the inquiry formally at 9, she'd said. Under the Wisengamot's mandatory hearing charter, they have to acknowledge it within the hour and schedule an emergency session for the same day if the grounds are sufficient. The grounds are sufficient. I'll see to it. She'd looked at Harry. You will present your sovereign claim personally. Not through a representative, not through a lawyer, not through me. The ancient traditions require the sovereign to speak in their own voice. Anything less and the ministry's procedural machinery will find a way to delay it. A pause. Can you do that? Yes, Harry had said. He meant it then. He meant it now, standing in the atrium at 8:30 on a Tuesday morning with the golden statue casting its long shadows and the full weight of the Ministry of Magic conducting its self-important business all around him. Hermione had the legal documents in her bag, the full death sovereignty records, the pre-ministry legal codes, the Wisengamot charter provisions, the authorization records from Augusta's inquiry, the scan results from Pomfrey. Cross-referenced, annotated, indexed by argument. She'd been awake until 2 in the morning, and she looked like it, but she also looked like someone who would argue before the Wisengamot without notes if she had to and win. The sovereign claim filing, she said, quiet and fast, reviewing while they waited for the clock to move toward 9. You state your name and your nature. You formally assert the death sovereignty tradition. You present the scan evidence. You invoke the pre-1707 legal foundation. And then, she looked at him. You make the claim. Specifically. What was stolen, what it was used for, and what you're reclaiming. Which is, Ron said. Authority over everything built from Harry's stolen blood, Hermione said. Including Voldemort's Horcruxes. Including any binding or magical contract established using that blood. Including, she paused. Including the magical anchors that have been keeping Voldemort's fragments stable in the living world. That'll get their attention, Ron said. That'll end several careers, Neville said. He said it without satisfaction and without regret. Just plainly. The careers of people who had signed authorizations and filed them in archives and assumed they'd stay there. Harry checked the clock on the atrium wall. 8:52. Vane found them at 8:54. She materialized from a side corridor in her grey robes with her clipboard, and she walked straight to Harry without any performance of surprise at finding him there, which told him she'd known he was coming. She had either been watching or someone had told her, and he noted this but didn't address it because her face was doing the same complicated thing it had done in the greenhouse corridor, the scientist revising the experiment. You're filing today, she said. At 9, Harry said. I've been in the archives for 3 days, she said. She held out a folder. The authorized research signatures, I found the full chain of authorization. Every signatory. Not just the 3 on your records. The complete approval chain going back to the initial authorization in 1981. She paused. It's worse than what Augusta Longbottom has. There are 7 ministry officials in the chain, including 2 who are currently serving. Harry took the folder. Why are you giving me this? He said. Vane looked at him steadily. Because when you assert the sovereign claim, the Wisengamot will want evidence of systemic complicity to justify the scope of what you're claiming. What Augusta has covers your personal injury. What I have covers the institutional architecture. She paused again. The Department of Mysteries has been aware of your death sovereignty indicators for at least 3 years. There are internal memos. The decision to suppress rather than investigate, that decision has names attached to it. She said this last sentence with the flatness of someone reading a verdict. Not angry. Past anger, into something more useful. 3 years, Harry said. Yes. They knew what I was and they sent Vane here to contain it, Hermione said, half to herself, the pieces clicking. They knew what he was, Vane said, and they decided it was more useful to manage than to acknowledge. A death sovereign operating at full capacity and with full knowledge of their nature is, not controllable. The ministry's institutional preference is for controllable things. Harry looked at her. You're putting your career on the line. Probably, she said. She didn't seem distressed about this. She had the expression of someone who has weighed something against something else and reached a clean conclusion. I've been putting the ministry's preference over the truth for 22 years. The math eventually stops working. Harry put Vane's folder in his bag alongside Hermione's documents. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me, she said. Win. The clock moved to 9. In an office 2 floors above, Augusta Longbottom set a formal inquiry before the Wisengamot clerk. Harry walked to the lifts. The thing about the ministry, Harry was discovering, was that it moved very quickly when it was frightened and very slowly when it was comfortable, and a sovereign claim filed under pre-1707 magical law by a living death sovereign was not a thing the ministry was comfortable with. The Wisengamot clerk, a small, precise man who had been processing filings for 30 years and had clearly never processed anything remotely like this, read the grounds of Augusta's inquiry and went very still, and then stood up and went to find his supervisor, and his supervisor went to find their supervisor, And within 45 minutes the emergency session had been scheduled and notices sent to every sitting Wisengamot member. Harry waited in a corridor with his friends and a cup of tea that Hermione had produced from somewhere, and he thought about nothing in particular. This was a new skill he'd developed in the last week, the ability to simply wait, to exist in the interval between decisions without filling it with anxiety. The whisper was present even here, even in the Ministry building, muted by distance from Hogwarts and the layers of institutional magic, but still there, the steady hum of his domain at the back of his awareness. He felt the threshold once while he waited, a maintenance worker, 3 floors below, whose heart was doing something irregular. He felt it the way you feel weather changing, the cold directional sense of it, and it stabilized without his intervention after a few moments, the heart resolving its irregularity on its own. He noted this. The range was extending. Cornelius Fudge arrived at 10:15. He came down the corridor from the ministerial offices with 2 aides and the expression of a man who has been given news that has disrupted a schedule he was very invested in. He was wearing his lime green bowler hat, which Harry had always found difficult to take seriously and took even less seriously now. He stopped when he saw Harry. Harry looked at him. Fudge looked at Harry. The last time they'd been in the same space, Fudge had been declaring Harry a dangerous, attention-seeking liar in multiple public forums. The time before that, Fudge had been at Hogwarts the night Cedric Diggory was murdered and Voldemort returned, and his response to that event had been denial. Harry didn't feel rage about this. He felt the clean, precise assessment of someone who had already decided what this person was and what they were worth and had moved on to working around them. Potter, Fudge said. His voice attempted authority and landed somewhere closer to uncertain. What exactly do you think you're, filing a sovereign claim before the Wisengamot, Harry said. Under the pre-1707 magical law traditions. I believe the emergency session is at 11. This is, I don't know what Augusta Longbottom has told you, but this kind of legal stunt, Minister, Harry said, pleasantly. Fudge stopped. I'd read the charter provisions before the session if I were you, Harry said. Specifically Article 7, which describes the Wisengamot's mandatory obligations in sovereign claim cases. You might want to know what you can and can't do before we're all in the room together. He held Fudge's gaze for exactly the right amount of time, long enough to be clear, short enough not to be theatrical, and then he picked up his tea and went back to waiting. Behind him he heard Fudge say something to one of his aides in a low, urgent voice, and the aide's quick footsteps heading in the direction of the legal library. Ron, sitting beside him on the corridor bench, said quietly, "That was very good." "It was accurate," Harry said. "That's what made it good." The Wisengamot chamber was underground, below even the Department of Mysteries, in a circular room with tiered seating that had been in use since before the Ministry existed, since the time of the traditions Harry was about to invoke. The stone of it was very old. Older than most of the building above it. Harry felt it when he walked in, the accumulated weight of judgments and declarations and the long human business of law, and underneath all of that, the deep particular cold of a place where significant things had been decided about life and death. The chamber recognized him. He felt it in the stone under his feet. The Wisengamot members were seated in their tiered rows, 50 of them in plum robes, the full membership for an emergency session. Fudge sat in the minister's chair at the head of the chamber with the expression of a man trying to project authority that no longer quite fit him. Beside the chamber entrance, Augusta Longbottom stood with the upright stillness of a soldier at parade rest. Her expression was a controlled, directed fury that looked, from a certain angle, rather magnificent. Harry walked to the speaking floor. He stood in the center of the circular space with Hermione beside him. Ron and Neville had taken seats in the public gallery. Vane was at the back of the chamber with her clipboard, which she wasn't looking at. Fudge called the session to order with the gavel. His voice was doing its best impression of steady. This emergency session has been called on the grounds filed by Madame Augusta Longbottom under the Wisengamot's mandatory inquiry provisions, he said. The grounds concern, alleged ritual violations and a sovereign claim under the pre-1707 traditions. He said, "Sovereign claim the way you say a word in a language you don't fully believe is real. Mr. Potter. I understand you intend to present this claim personally." "Yes," Harry said. The chamber was very quiet. Harry stood in the center of the speaking floor and looked up at 50 Wisengamot members and the Minister for Magic and Thought, with the clean clarity that had been his companion all week, about what he was here to do. Not to perform. Not to impress. To state a truth that was his to state, before the body that was obligated to hear it. "My name is Harry James Potter," he said. His voice carried in the old chamber with no effort, the acoustics designed to carry a single voice to every seat. "I am 15 years old. I have attended Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry for 4 years. I survived the killing curse as an infant. Those are the known facts." He paused. "What is less known, what has been actively suppressed, is this: the killing curse's passage through my magical core left behind the signature of the death sovereignty tradition. I am, by every indicator the tradition documents, a death sovereign. The first in recorded history in several centuries." A murmur moved through the Wisengamot seats. Harry let it run and then continued. "The death sovereignty tradition predates this ministry, this chamber, and every piece of magical law that has been enacted in the last 300 years. It does not require your recognition to be real. But I am bringing it before you because what follows from it, legally, magically, and in terms of what has been done to me, falls within your mandatory jurisdiction under your own founding charter." He reached into his bag. "I am presenting the following evidence." Hermione was already moving, distributing copies to the Wisengamot clerk with the efficient certainty of someone who has rehearsed this. The clerk, the same small, precise man from earlier, took them with the expression of a person whose day had already exceeded their professional experience and showed no signs of improving. "Madame Pomfrey's diagnostic scan results," Harry said, "showing 28 blood theft ritual markers in my magical core, dating from infancy to the present. Structural damage consistent with years of unauthorized power extraction. And the secondary signature, the death sovereignty impression, that has been present since the night Voldemort's curse rebounded." He watched the members reading. He watched the first wave of reaction, surprise, discomfort, the particular shifting attention of people confronting something they hadn't known. "Ministry archive records," he continued, "showing that 15 of the 28 ritual extractions were authorized under the Greater Public Good Clause by Ministry officials, including 2 currently serving members of this Wisengamot." He let that land. "The remaining 13 were performed by practitioners affiliated with Voldemort, using the same blood pathways established by the authorized rituals, pathways that remained accessible because the authorized extractions created and maintained them." He paused. "The Ministry authorized rituals that Voldemort's followers then used. Those two things are not separate events. They are connected. The archive records show the connection." The chamber had gone very quiet. A different kind of quiet than before, the quiet of people processing implications. "Under the death sovereignty tradition," Harry said, "and under Article 3 of the pre-1707 Magical Law Foundation, which your own charter acknowledges as the legal bedrock on which this body stands, I am asserting a claim of sovereign injury." He set his shoulders. "What was taken from me without consent, my blood, my power, the threshold authority of my magical core, remains mine. Under the ancient law, anything built from stolen sovereign material is subject to the sovereign's claim. I am asserting that claim now." He looked up at the chamber. He looked at the 50 members in their plum robes, at Fudge's lime green bowler, at Augusta Longbottom standing at the entrance with her controlled fury. "Voldemort's Horcruxes," he said, "were stabilized using my blood. My stolen blood. Under the claim of sovereign injury, I have legal and magical authority over those objects. The claim does not require your endorsement, it is prior to your law. But I am notifying this body because the claim, when fully asserted, will invalidate every magical anchor Voldemort has placed in the living world, and the political and military consequences of that are your responsibility to manage." He paused. "I thought you should know it was coming." The silence lasted for 3 full seconds. Then 3 things happened almost simultaneously. Fudge stood up and said, "This is completely irregular." A Wisengamot member in the upper tier, an older witch named Griselda Marchbanks, who Harry vaguely recognized as someone Augusta had mentioned, said in a voice that cut through Fudge's like a knife through cloth, "Minister, sit down. Article 7 is clear. The claim has been stated before a quorum. It is in effect." And from somewhere in the chamber, a sound Harry had never heard before, a low harmonic, below hearing but felt in the chest, resonated through the old stone floor. The chamber itself, recognizing the invocation of its foundational traditions. Fudge sat down. Griselda Marchbanks looked at Harry with the expression of an academic encountering a primary source. "The claim of sovereign injury is legally entered," she said. "Mr. Potter, are you prepared to present the specific enumeration of the claim?" "Yes," Harry said. "Then proceed." He proceeded. He was there for 2 hours. The enumeration was Hermione's work. She'd built it like an argument, like the best essay she'd ever written, structured and cross-referenced and entirely watertight. Harry delivered it the way she drilled him the previous evening, clearly, without excess, with the weight of each point fully placed before moving to the next. The Horcruxes. The blood pathways. The ministry authorizations. Vane's documentation of the Dom suppression. The complete chain of complicity, from Voldemort's first blood theft to the authorized rituals to the Department of Mystery's decision to classify and contain rather than investigate. By the time he finished, 3 Wisengamot members had requested recusal from the session on grounds that might have been conscience and might have been the legal instinct of people who could see where the walls were closing. The Minister for Magic had stopped speaking entirely and was sitting in his chair with the expression of a man watching a structure he believed was solid develop cracks in real time. Griselda Marchbanks called a procedural recess. In the corridor outside the chamber, Hermione exhaled for what seemed like the first time in 2 hours and sat on a bench with her hands flat on her knees. Ron put his arm around her shoulders. Neville stood with his back against the wall with the distant expression of someone who had watched something large and important happen and was still finding the edges of it. Harry stood in the corridor and felt the ministry building around him, its institutional weight, its bureaucratic momentum, the vast machinery of a government that had been managing magical Britain for 3 centuries, and he felt it differently now than he'd felt it an hour ago. Not smaller. Not less significant. But, accountable. The way something becomes accountable when you know its foundational law better than it does. Vane came out of the chamber and stood beside him. 2 of the current Wisengamot members you named are already consulting lawyers, she said. Good, Harry said. Fudge is going to try to appeal the session ruling. He can try, Harry said. Article 7 doesn't have an appeals mechanism. Vane looked at him sidelong. Did you study magical law before this week? No, Harry said. You're good at it. Hermione is good at it, Harry said. I'm good at saying what she figured out. Vane almost smiled. It was brief and professional and entirely genuine. That's a kind of intelligence, she said. The recess lasted 20 minutes. When the chamber reconvened, Griselda Marchbanks looked at Fudge in the way that senior people sometimes looked at junior people who were about to be reminded of the limits of their office, and she said, "The claim is entered and in effect. The Wisengamot will begin its formal inquiry into the authorization chain documented in evidence. The 2 serving members named in the documentation are suspended from their seats pending the outcome." She looked at Harry. "Mr. Potter. The claim's magical implications, the authority you assert over the Horcrux objects, are acknowledged by this body as legally founded. We do not have a framework for what comes next. I suspect," and here something moved through her expression that was not quite humor and was not quite awe but was somewhere between them. "I suspect that's because what comes next has never happened before." No, Harry said. It hasn't. Will you keep this body informed of developments? Yes, Harry said. Promptly and completely. In exchange for the same. Marchbanks looked at him for a moment. "Done," she said. The session ended at 1:30. They ate lunch in the ministry cafeteria, which was the most mundane possible sequel to the morning they'd had. The food was institutional and slightly overcooked, and Neville ate an enormous amount of it with the focused energy of someone who had been running on adrenaline since breakfast and needed to recalibrate. "Two suspended Wisengamot members," Ron said, through a mouthful of shepherd's pie. "An inquiry into the ministry authorizations. The sovereign claim on the Horcruxes formally acknowledged." He counted on his fingers. "We've been in the building for 5 hours. The inquiry will take time," Hermione said. She had her notebook out even over lunch. "But the claim is in effect now, legally and magically." Which means the Horcruxes know," Harry said. They all looked at him. "The record said what was taken announces itself," Harry said. "I've been feeling it since this morning. Since the claim was stated in the chamber." He set his fork down. "It's like a vibration. In the threshold sense. Things tuning toward me. There's a direction to it." He looked at Hermione. "The diary was destroyed. The ring we think was destroyed. But there are others. I have 4 confirmed locations," Hermione said, reaching for her notes. 3 of them," Harry said, "are in England. I can feel the direction from here." He frowned slightly, pressing inward against the sensation. "One is closer than the others." "How close?" Neville said. Harry turned slightly in his seat. He oriented the feeling the way you orient a compass needle, following its pull. It was directional and specific and entirely unlike any magical sense he'd experienced before, not like spell detection, not like awareness of another person's magic. It was the pull of something that contained his blood, his material, responding to the claim the way metal responds to a magnet. "North," Harry said. "North and high. Above the ground." He thought. "Something in an elevated location." Hermione was already writing. "Hogwarts is north of London," she said. "Elevated position. There's a Horcrux at Hogwarts." The 4 of them sat with that for a moment. "There has been," Ron said slowly, "for the entire time we've been there." "Probably," Harry said. "Right," Ron said, and pushed his shepherd's pie away, and then pulled it back, because it occurred to him apparently that an inanimate Horcrux that had been sitting somewhere for years was not going anywhere in the next 20 minutes, and shepherd's pie was not improved by going cold. They left the ministry at 3, flowing back to Hogsmeade and walking the path to Hogwarts in the late afternoon light. The castle came into view as it always did on that approach, sudden and enormous and familiar, the towers catching the sun, the lake silver at its feet. Harry looked at it as he walked toward it and felt what was inside it feeling him back. The specific vibration of something that contained his blood, registering his presence the way the threshold registered it, not with intelligence, not with will, but with the simple magnetic inevitability of things that were connected. "Where in the castle?" Hermione said. "I'll know when I'm closer," Harry said. "And then?" Neville said. Harry thought about the 3rd stage of death sovereignty development. About the sovereign claim. About Hermione's note on his pillow, what was taken announces itself. He thought about what it meant to reclaim something, not to destroy it from outside, but to exercise authority over it from within. The Horcruxes were made partly from his material. Under the ancient law, they were subject to him. Not to his wand, not to a specific countercurse. To his authority over the threshold. "Then I call in the debt," Harry said. They were almost at the castle gates when Harry felt something else, not the Horcrux vibration. Something sharper, more urgent, the specific cold of a threshold very close and approaching fast. Not a student. He stopped walking. The others stopped too, reading his stillness. "What is it?" Hermione said. "Someone's coming," Harry said. "Through the boundary." He turned. Not back toward Hogsmeade. Toward the edge of the grounds, near the forest, where the Hogwarts wards met the open countryside. The air at the edge of the wards was already changing. He could feel it, the particular quality of a space being entered by something that carried death with it, not as a weapon exactly, but as a presence. Then the figure appeared at the edge of the trees. It was alone. No followers, no retinue, no theatrical entrance. Just a figure in black robes, tall and angular, stepping out of the boundary of the forest with the precise control of someone who had chosen exactly this moment to arrive. The late afternoon light hit a face that was barely a face, flat, white, with the red eyes that Harry had last seen in the graveyard, above the knife, above Cedric's body, above everything that had happened in the year that followed. Voldemort stood at the edge of the Hogwarts grounds and looked at Harry Potter. Harry stood at the castle gates and looked back. There was no wand raised on either side. No spell cast. Just the two of them in the September afternoon, at a distance of perhaps 50 yards, and between them the specific quality of air that existed when two things that had been connected across death and time and stolen blood finally occupied the same space with full knowledge of what they were to each other. The Horcrux vibration intensified. Of course it did. The Creator was here. The Source was present. Harry felt something else too, a pressure, through the scar, the old connection they shared through the night Voldemort had used Harry's blood to rebuild his body. That connection had always worked one direction. Voldemort threw to Harry. Pain and intrusion. He pushed back through it, not violently, but with the simple authority of someone establishing territorial lines, and felt Voldemort's shock at the other end of it, the particular shock of something that had always worked one way working differently, the shock of finding a door you've always opened freely suddenly locked from inside. Voldemort tilted his head. His expression did something that was not quite curiosity and not quite fear and was more interesting than either. He spoke, and his voice carried across the 50 yards without magic, just carried, the voice of someone who had spent decades perfecting the delivery of power. You have been busy, Harry, Voldemort said. Yes, Harry said. The Wizengamot. A pause. Augusta Longbottom. The sovereign claim. He was testing the shape of each fact as he said it, the way you probe a structure for weak points. You understand what you've done. What you're capable of. Yes, Harry said again. Then you understand, Voldemort said, that I did not come here to fight you. This was not what Harry had expected. He noted this, noted the surprise and catalogued it and kept his expression exactly as it was, open and present and entirely unafraid. What did you come for? To see what you've become, Voldemort said. He said it with the detached honesty of someone answering a question they haven't been asked because the question they were asked matters less. Anne, he stopped. The red eyes moved across Harry's face with the attention of someone reading a text. To understand what it means for me. I think you already know what it means, Harry said. Voldemort was quiet for a moment. The September light moved across the grounds. In the forest behind him, Harry could sense the Thestrals moving, not fleeing, not panicking, but arranging themselves. Witnessing. The Horcruxes, Voldemort said. Yes, Harry said. You can feel them. I can feel all three that are still intact, Harry said. One is in this castle. Voldemort's expression moved. Something in the red eyes that was not quite fear. Voldemort had spent decades burning fear out of himself, it had cost him everything human about him and he'd done it deliberately, but which was the residue of fear? The shape that fear leaves when it's been removed but the structure that housed it still remains. You intend to reclaim them, Voldemort said. Yes, Harry said. You understand what that means for the fragments of soul they contain. Yes, Harry said. I do. Voldemort stood in the edge of the forest light and said nothing for a moment. What was happening behind the flat white face Harry could only partially read, the scar connection was there, muted by his own pushback, giving him impressions rather than clarity. He felt, not thought, not language. Feeling. And the feeling from the other side of the connection was not rage. It was something colder and more complicated and, Harry thought, almost exhausted. I could destroy the remaining Horcruxes myself, Voldemort said. Before you reach them. You could try, Harry said. But you won't. Why not? Because a Horcrux is a piece of your soul, Harry said. And even you can't deliberately destroy the fragments you split off. It's not about power. It's about what souls can and can't do to themselves. He held Voldemort's gaze steadily. And because if you destroy them, what's left of you has no anchor in the living world. You'd be, diminished, and permanent, in whatever form that leaves you in. You've been choosing the alternative for 30 years. A pause. The only way this ends is through someone else's authority over those fragments. And the only person who has that authority is me. The red eyes held his. Harry felt the scar connection pulse, once, strong, like a heartbeat, and what came through it in that pulse was not a thought or a plan. It was the oldest thing that lived in whatever remained of Tom Riddle beneath the decades of dark magic and deliberate self-destruction. Not love. Not regret, exactly. Something prior to both of those, the original desire, the desire that had driven everything, that had made Tom Riddle the most brilliant student of his generation before it made him Voldemort. He didn't want to die. He'd never wanted to die. That was the engine of everything. The Immortality Project, the Horcruxes, the terror of death, the willingness to fracture his soul 6 times rather than face the threshold. And Harry, Death's Own, the sovereign of the threshold, the person with authority over the very thing Voldemort had spent his life trying to escape, stood 50 yards away and held his gaze and felt all of that, clearly, without judgment. There's a version of this, Harry said, where you don't fight me. Where you let me reclaim what's mine and you, stop. He watched the red eyes carefully. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know if what's left of you can choose it. But I'm telling you it's an option because you came here without followers, without a wand raised, and that means something. Voldemort looked at him for a long time. You are nothing like what I expected, Voldemort said. You expected the managed version, Harry said. The 60% version. The version that was running with a governor on it. He held Voldemort's gaze. This is the actual version. The sun moved toward the edge of the world. The light on the grounds changed from gold to amber and the shadows lengthened and the castle behind Harry threw its vast shape across the grass. The Thestrals were very still in the forest edge. The Horcrux in the castle, Voldemort said finally. You intend to find it tonight? Yes, Harry said. Another long pause. Then Voldemort said, with the specific precision of someone conceding a point in an argument they'd already decided they'd lost, the room of hidden things. 7th floor. You'll know it when you feel it. Harry was very still for a moment. He hadn't expected that. He filed it, the gesture, the choice, the meaning of the choice, without expression, without response to its significance. But he felt it, and he thought he understood it. The smallest possible move toward the option he described. The gesture of a person who was not capable of surrender and was not ready to choose it and was making, for the first time, a gesture toward the territory where surrender might eventually live. Thank you, Harry said. Voldemort said nothing. He turned and walked back into the forest, and the trees took him, and the threshold cold that had been present in the space he'd occupied for the last 10 minutes diminished, and the ordinary September evening settled back over the grounds like a cloth over a piece of furniture. Harry stood at the castle gates. Behind him, Ron said, in a voice that was doing an impressive job of being steady, did Voldemort just help you? He told me where a Horcrux was, Harry said. That's helping, Ron said. That's genuinely helping. He's not doing it out of kindness, Hermione said. She had her thinking face on, processing rapidly. Harry said something to him. About the option. About stopping. She looked at Harry. Do you think he actually heard it? I think, Harry said slowly, that somewhere in whatever he's become, some very small part of Tom Riddle heard it. And couldn't dismiss it entirely. He looked at the forest for a moment. Which doesn't make him safe. Or good. Or anything other than what he is. He turned toward the castle. But it's information. They went inside. The castle's warmth wrapped around Harry as he crossed the entrance hall, and the torches straightened, and the whisper ran steady and deep beneath everything, and the Horcrux vibration was stronger now, pulling north and up, the room of hidden things on the 7th floor, full of the accumulated lost things of centuries of students. And somewhere in all of that accumulated lost history, a piece of Voldemort's fractured soul in an object made partly from Harry's stolen blood, waiting to be reclaimed. Tomorrow, Harry thought. Tonight he needed to sleep. He went upstairs, past the ghosts who bowed their heads slightly as he passed the torches that burned steady, through the portrait hole into the Gryffindor common room where the fire was warm and the evening was ordinary and Neville was already at a table working on herbology because Neville, regardless of what had happened that day, was a person who did his homework. Harry sat by the fire. Hermione sat across from him. Ron sat between them and put his feet on the table and said, "When this is all over, I want to go on holiday somewhere. Somewhere with no Horcruxes and no Wizengamot and no lime green bowler hats." "Yes," Harry said. "You're agreeing very easily." "Because I want that too," Harry said. He leaned back in the chair and looked at the common room ceiling, at the warm familiar ordinary of it. "When this is over. Holiday. Somewhere boring." "Gloriously boring," Ron confirmed. The fire crackled. The common room filled and emptied with the ordinary traffic of Gryffindor House going about its evening. And Harry sat in it, and was present in it, and rested in the clarity of knowing exactly what tomorrow was going to be.